Thousands of years ago, the world looked very different. Giant creatures like woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and enormous ground sloths roamed across frozen lands. These animals had adapted to survive in the cold, harsh climate of the Ice Age. They were strong, fierce, and built to last. But then something changed. The cold began to fade, the ice started to melt, and slowly these powerful animals began to disappear. One by one, they vanished from the Earth forever. What caused their extinction? Was it a mix of changing climates, disappearing habitats, and the arrival of skilled human hunters? Did all these forces together bring an end to an incredible age of giants? Before we begin this prehistoric Ice Age journey, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Drop it in the comments below and enjoy a fascinating story about the Ice Age animals went extinct. Over the course of Earth's incredibly long history, our planet has gone through several chilling chapters when huge sheets of ice stretched across massive areas of land. These frozen chapters are known as Ice Ages. The most recent and most closely studied of these icy periods is often simply called the Ice Age, but scientists refer to it more precisely as the Quaternary Glaciation. This great age of ice began around 2,600,000 years ago, and in a broader sense, it's still ongoing today. However, we're now living in a warmer phase within it, known as an interglacial period, where much of the ice has melted back. The part of this ice age most famously tied to giant beasts and huge glaciers is called the Pleistocene epoch. This time period lasted from around 2,580,000 years ago until roughly 11,700 years ago. During these years, massive glaciers grew and shrank again and again, creeping across continents and then pulling back. The Pleistocene was far colder than today's climate. Average global temperatures were several degrees Celsius lower, especially near the poles. But it's important to know the Ice Age wasn't just one long deep freeze. Instead, it was full of dramatic shifts between freezing cold periods, called glacials, and warmer spells, called interglacials. When it got cold, giant ice sheets spread out, covering huge parts of the land. When things warmed up, those icy blankets retreated, sometimes shrinking to sizes smaller than today's glaciers. What caused all these ups and downs? It wasn't just random weather. These climate swings were driven by slow, predictable changes in Earth's movement through space, its orbit, tilt, and the gentle wobble of its spinning axis. These movements, known together as Milankovitch cycles, changed how sunlight was spread across the planet over tens of thousands of years. That, in turn, shaped Earth's climate patterns, and because so much water was frozen in ice sheets, the air and land in many regions became not only colder but drier. Less water was available for rain and snow elsewhere, turning some areas into deserts or cold, windy grasslands. Powerful winds often swept across these stark landscapes, stirred up by the sharp contrast between warm and frozen regions. The most dramatic part of the Ice Age world was the size of the glaciers. At their peak, these gigantic ice sheets covered large parts of the northern hemisphere. In what is now North America, the Laurentide ice sheet spread over most of Canada and pushed deep into the United States, reaching as far south as today's Ohio and Missouri River valleys. Over in Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet blanketed Scandinavia, the British Isles, and parts of what are now Germany and Poland. Smaller ice caps and mountain glaciers also existed in faraway places like South America and New Zealand. These glaciers were not just wide, they were thick, sometimes stretching several kilometers deep. Their weight was crushing, pressing down on the land below. As they advanced and melted back, they dramatically changed the landscape. They carved deep valleys, scraped away topsoil, and dumped massive piles of rock and debris, forming land features like moraines, drumlins, and eskers. In fact, the Great Lakes of North America were formed this way, carved out by moving ice and filled with meltwater. Another huge effect of all this frozen water was a major drop in sea levels. At the height of the Ice Age, sea levels were around 120 meters, or about 400 feet, lower than today. This revealed vast areas of land that are now underwater. In some places, land bridges formed, connecting continents that are now separated by ocean. The most famous of these was Beringia, a wide strip of land linking Siberia and Alaska. This bridge allowed animals, and later early humans, to cross from Asia into North America. Life during the Ice Age was extremely tough. In many places that weren't covered in glaciers, the ground was still frozen solid, a condition called permafrost, where the soil stays frozen for at least 2 years straight. This frozen ground spread across parts of Siberia, Alaska, and northern Europe. Plants had to adapt to these brutal conditions. In the coldest regions, the land was covered in tundra, flat, treeless plains with low-growing plants, mosses, and lichens. But even more common was the mammoth steppe, also known as the tundra steppe, a unique mix of grassland and tundra. This strange but rich ecosystem stretched across continents and supported a surprising number of large plant-eating animals. In slightly warmer zones just south of the glaciers, boreal forests, dominated by spruce and fir trees, took root in more sheltered areas. But for animals, survival was always a challenge. Food could be hard to find, especially during long winters when the land was buried in snow and ice. Winters were brutally cold and windy, while summers were short and cool, offering just a brief window for plants to grow and animals to prepare for the next freeze. Throughout the Pleistocene, Earth went through many cycles of freezing and thawing. Scientists have counted dozens of these glacial and interglacial periods over the past 2,600,000 years. But one period stands out as especially important when we talk about the extinction of giant Ice Age animals, or megafauna. This was the last glacial maximum, often called the LGM, which occurred between around 26,500 and 20,000 years ago. During this time, the ice sheets were at their largest and temperatures were at their coldest. After the LGM, Earth began to warm up. Slowly but steadily, the glaciers began to melt and shrink. This long thaw marked the beginning of the Holocene epoch, the warm period we live in today, which began about 11,700 years ago. The extreme climate of the Ice Age, with its bitter cold and shifting landscapes, played a huge role in shaping the creatures that lived through it. The widespread mammoth steppe offered plenty of food for large grazers like mammoths and bison. But only animals that could stay warm, move through snow, and survive long stretches of hunger made it. This harsh world helped create the megafauna, the mighty mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats, that became the legends of the Ice Age. Their size, strength, and special features were all shaped by the unforgiving forces of a colder, tougher Earth. The Ice Age was one of the most extraordinary chapters in the history of life on Earth. It was a time when some of the biggest, most powerful animals to ever walk the planet roamed freely across the land. Scientists use a special word to describe these giants, megafauna, which means very large animals. There's no single rule that defines how big an animal has to be to qualify as a megafauna, but most experts agree it usually refers to creatures that weigh more than 44 kilograms, or about 100 pounds. But during the Ice Age, this term often referred to animals even bigger, those that weighed more than 1,000 kilograms, which is over 2,200 pounds. This incredible age of giants happened during what scientists call the Pleistocene epoch. That period began around 2.5 million years ago and ended about 11,700 years ago. What made it so special was not just the cold or the ice, but the sheer number and variety of huge animals living all over the world. From the woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats of the frozen northern plains, to the giant ground sloths and armoured glyptodons in South America, and the towering marsupials in Australia. These massive creatures were everywhere. But why did so many animals grow so large during this time? One of the biggest reasons has to do with how body size helps animals stay warm in cold environments. Scientists call this idea Bergmann's rule. It says that animals living in colder places tend to be larger than those in warmer areas. The reason is simple physics. Big bodies lose heat more slowly than small ones. If you're a giant animal in freezing temperatures, your large body helps you hold on to heat better, almost like being wrapped in a thick coat. Your body works like a built-in heater, keeping you warm even when the world around you is frozen solid. Another idea, called Allen's rule, adds to this. It says animals in cold climates usually have shorter arms, legs, ears, and tails, which helps them keep their body heat. By having a more compact shape, they don't lose as much warmth through their limbs or other body parts. Together, these rules help explain why Ice Age animals often had stocky, powerful bodies with thick limbs and small extremities. They were built to survive the cold. But warmth wasn't the only reason they grew big. Food was a major part of the story too. Even though the Ice Age was cold, huge stretches of land were covered in open grasslands called the Mammoth Steppe. These grasslands spread across the northern parts of Europe, Asia, and North America. In summer, despite the chill, these regions burst to life with nutrient-rich grasses and plants, enough to feed herds of enormous herbivores. Still, a lot of the plants were tough and hard to digest, like dry, fibrous grasses. That's where size came in handy again. Bigger animals have bigger stomachs and longer digestive systems. This allowed them to eat large amounts of rough plants and slowly break them down to get all the nutrients they needed. Smaller animals just couldn't handle that kind of diet as well. So the ability to process massive volumes of food was another big advantage for Ice Age giants. Being big also helped animals survive predators. A huge mammoth or a tank-like glyptodon would have been very difficult for a predator to attack. It would take a lot of strength, coordination, and risk to bring down such a giant. As a result, prey animals that were bigger had a better chance of survival, and over time their species evolved to be even larger. But this also led to an evolutionary arms race. As prey animals grew bigger, predators had to grow stronger and more powerful too. That's why Ice Age predators like the saber-toothed cat, the dire wolf, and the giant short-faced bear were so fearsome they had to keep up with their massive prey. Deep snow also played a surprising role in this story. Small animals could get stuck in snowdrifts or struggle to move, but larger animals with their weight and power could push through the snow more easily, almost like natural snowplows. This gave them access to food that smaller creatures couldn't reach. Plus, bigger bodies are more energy efficient for travelling long distances. They burn less energy per kilogram of body weight than smaller animals, which helped them survive when food was spread far and wide across the landscape. And when food became scarce, especially in the long freezing winters, large animals had another advantage: fat storage. Big bodies can store a lot more fat, which acts like a fuel tank during hard times. That extra fat allowed them to survive even when food was buried under snow or completely gone for months. It was like having a built-in backup supply of energy. Their size also affected how they raised their young. Large animals usually have fewer babies, and those babies take longer to grow inside the mother. But when they're born, they're much larger and stronger, giving them a better chance of surviving in the harsh world around them. And many of these animals, like mammoths, lived in herds. These groups helped protect their young from predators, shared knowledge about where to find food, and even worked together to clear snow or move across tough terrain. In these social groups, bigger animals often became leaders or protectors, making their size even more valuable. However, large animals tend to live longer lives, which means even though they have fewer babies at a time, they have more chances to reproduce over many years. That helped their species survive and thrive across thousands of years. The Ice Age created a world where being big wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Cold temperatures, vast grasslands, dangerous predators, deep snow, and seasonal hunger all worked together to push animals toward gigantism. Nature shaped a time when size meant strength, survival, and success, and gave rise to some of the most awe-inspiring creatures ever to roam the earth. The giant ground sloths were among the most extraordinary animals to ever walk the earth. They were part of a group known as megafauna, a term scientists use to describe very large animals that once lived all over North and South America. These huge creatures thrived for tens of millions of years and played an important role in their ecosystems before vanishing forever at the end of the Ice Age, around 11,000 years ago. That time period is known to scientists as the Pleistocene epoch. Even though the giant ground sloths are related to the small, slow tree sloths we know today, they were nothing alike in size or lifestyle. They also had distant relatives like armadillos and anteaters. All of these animals are part of a special group called Xenarthra, known for having unique joints in their backbones. Unlike modern tree sloths that live in the forest canopy, these ancient giants lived on the ground. They had strong bones, thick limbs, and powerful muscles that supported their enormous weight. over time they evolved into many different species and shapes, filling a wide range of roles in the ancient environments of the Ice Age. One of the most famous of all the giant ground sloths was Megatherium americanum. This incredible animal lived mainly in South America and was one of the largest land mammals to ever exist. It could grow as long as 6 meters, or about 20 feet, from its snout to the tip of its tail. Some individuals weighed up to 4 metric tons, which is about 8,800 pounds, roughly the same as a large African elephant. Megatherium had a massive bulky body, thick legs like tree trunks, and long curved claws on its feet. But those claws weren't made for climbing trees. Instead, they helped the sloth dig, defend itself, and pull down branches to feed. One of the most amazing things about Megatherium was its ability to stand up on its back legs and tail, forming a kind of tripod. This upright stance gave it the advantage of reaching high into the trees to grab food that other animals couldn't access. With its height, strength, and huge claws, it could pull down large branches and strip leaves, twigs, and even bark from trees. Despite their massive bodies, giant ground sloths were slow and clumsy when they moved. Their heavy limbs and great size made them poor runners, so they couldn't easily escape predators. But their size was a kind of protection. Very few Ice Age predators dared to take on such giants, especially since they had powerful limbs and dangerous claws. Fossil evidence shows that these sloths often walked on the sides of their feet to keep their claws from wearing down, which gave them a slow, shuffling walk that was unlike any animal we see today. All giant ground sloths were herbivores, which means they only ate plants. They weren't picky eaters either. Instead of sticking to one type of plant, they likely ate whatever was available: leaves, fruit, seeds, twigs, roots, and tubers, depending on the season. Scientists have learned a lot about their diet from fossilized droppings called coprolites, found in dry caves. These ancient sloth droppings still contain bits of plants, pollen, and seeds, giving us a detailed look at what they ate thousands of years ago. The sloth's size and feeding habits went hand in hand. Their huge, clawed front limbs were perfect for pulling down branches. Their teeth were simple and peg-shaped, built for grinding tough plant material. In many species, the teeth didn't even have enamel and kept growing throughout their lives, an adaptation that helped them deal with the wear and tear of chewing abrasive plants. Although their soft tissues haven't survived in the fossil record, scientists believe they had strong lips and muscular tongues that helped them tear leaves and bark from trees. The story of giant ground sloths began in South America, where they first evolved and where the greatest number of species developed. But their journey didn't stop there. When the land bridge known as the Isthmus of Panama formed a little over 3 million years ago, it connected South America and North America. This event, called the Great American Biotic Interchange, allowed animals from both continents to cross into new lands. Some species of giant ground sloths travelled north into what is now the United States and Mexico, spreading across a wide variety of habitats, from dry grasslands to wet forests. Some, like Megatherium, preferred open woodlands and grassy plains. When it comes to their behaviour, giant ground sloths were probably more solitary than social. Instead of living in big groups like mammoths or bison, they may have travelled alone or in small family units. But they didn't need large numbers to stay safe. Their thick skin, great size, and dangerous claws gave them powerful defences against predators like Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, or packs of dire wolves. If they were attacked, they could rear up and swing their massive arms like clubs, using their claws to strike at any threat. Some species of ground sloths were also skilled diggers. Fossils suggest that they could dig large burrows, possibly to sleep in, hide from the weather, or protect themselves from danger. However, not all sloth species had this habit. Digging may have been more common in some than others. Perhaps one of the most fascinating parts of their story is their connection to humans. For thousands of years, early people in both North and South America shared their world with these giant sloths. Evidence from ancient campsites shows that humans hunted them, cut their meat, and used their bones and fur. Some fossils even show clear-cut marks from tools. Because giant sloths were so slow-moving, they may have been easy targets for determined hunters, even though they were big and strong. However, The giant ground sloths disappeared around 11,000 years ago, near the close of the last ice age. Scientists believe that their extinction was likely caused by a combination of two major factors. First, as the Earth's climate warmed, many of the forests and grasslands they depended on began to change or disappear. Second, humans were becoming better and more organised at hunting, putting added pressure on already struggling sloth populations. Together, these forces brought an end to these incredible animals, closing one of the most fascinating chapters in the story of life on Earth. One of the most fearsome and unforgettable predators of the Ice Age was the saber-toothed cat, and the most famous of them all was a creature called Smilodon. When people hear the term saber-toothed cat, they're usually thinking of Smilodon, especially two species known as Smilodon fatalis and Smilodon populator. Although there were other prehistoric cat-like animals with long, curved canine teeth, Smilodon was the most well-known and widely studied. These powerful hunters lived in both North and South America, and they first appeared around 2,500,000 years ago. They survived for an incredibly long time, eventually vanishing roughly 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. The most striking and unforgettable feature of Smilodon was, without a doubt, its massive canine teeth, those famous saber-like fangs. These teeth were long, curved and sharp-edged, shaped almost like daggers or steak knives. In large adult males, they could grow as long as 28 centimetres, or about 11 inches, from tip to root. Unlike regular cat teeth, these were thin from side to side, and had finely serrated edges that made them excellent for slicing through soft flesh. However, they were also fragile. If the teeth hit bone or were used improperly, they could break easily. Because of this, Smilodon had to hunt very carefully. It needed a very specific way of catching and killing prey, one that avoided putting too much pressure on its most important weapons. Just like baby humans grow milk teeth, young Smilodons had small milk sabers that would fall out as they got older. These were later replaced by the massive adult canines they became famous for. But Smilodon wasn't just about teeth. It also had an incredibly strong and muscular body. It was much heavier and more powerfully built than any big cat alive today, including lions and tigers. Its limbs, especially the front ones, were extremely thick and packed with muscle. The chest and arm muscles, including the biceps, were especially large, showing that it had incredible upper body strength. This strength was crucial for wrestling large animals to the ground. While cheetahs and lions rely on speed to chase prey, Smilodon wasn't a fast runner. In fact, it had a short tail, which tells us that it didn't need to keep its balance during long chases. Instead, it used ambush tactics, sneaking up on its prey and striking suddenly with explosive power. Even the skull and jaw of Smilodon was specially shaped to match its unique teeth. It could open its mouth extremely wide, up to about 120 degrees, much wider than modern cats, which typically can only open their mouths around 90 degrees. This wide gape allowed Smilodon to open its jaws wide enough to strike with its long teeth without hitting its lower jaw. Smilodon was not just strong, it was also a skilled and specialised hunter. It didn't chase after animals across the plains. Instead, it likely hid in bushes or trees, waited for the right moment and then pounced. Once it grabbed onto a large animal, it used its strong front legs and claws to pin it down. Then, when the prey was held tightly and couldn't move, Smilodon would deliver a quick, deadly bite. This bite wasn't meant to crush bones like a lion's bite. Instead, it was meant to pierce soft areas like the throat or belly. Its sabres could slice through major blood vessels like the jugular vein or carotid artery, or even cut the windpipe, causing the prey to bleed out or suffocate very quickly. Because its teeth were so delicate, Smilodon had to make sure the animal couldn't move before it struck. A struggling prey could easily cause one of those valuable sabres to snap. That's why its massive front legs were so important. They helped control the animal and keep it still. Some scientists think Smilodon might have hunted in groups like lions do today. This idea comes from fossil sites like the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, California, where thousands of Smilodon bones have been found in one place. This may suggest that they fed together, or possibly hunted together, especially when trying to take down very large animals. Smilodon's favourite prey were large, slow-moving plant-eating animals. These included young or sick woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, ancient bison, camels and horses. These animals were huge and carried a lot of meat, making them worth the risk. On the other hand, Smilodon was not good at hunting smaller, quicker animals. The long sabres were too awkward and too fragile for catching or biting small creatures that could thrash around or escape easily. It's important to understand that Smilodon didn't use its teeth for smashing through bones. Unlike hyenas, which have powerful jaws made for bone crushing, Smilodon relied on a totally different strategy. Its bite, especially at the tips of its long canines, was actually weaker than that of a modern lion when you compare them by size. Instead of brute strength, it used its sabres like surgical tools, sharp and precise. The finely serrated edges helped slice cleanly through skin and muscle, creating deep, deadly wounds that bled out quickly. To use these teeth effectively, Smilodon had to open its mouth extremely wide. Once the teeth pierced the flesh, it wasn't the jaws but the neck muscles that pushed them deeper into the prey. This method of killing was completely different from modern cats, who usually use suffocating bites or crush the skull. Thanks to fossil sites like the La Brea tar pits, where scientists have uncovered an extraordinary number of Smilodon skeletons, we now know a great deal about how these amazing animals lived, hunted, and even interacted with each other. These bones have helped paint a vivid picture of a creature that was not only powerful and deadly, but also beautifully adapted to a very specific way of life during one of the most fascinating periods in Earth's history. The woolly mammoth, whose scientific name is Mammothus primigenius, was one of the most famous and unforgettable animals of the Ice Age. These huge, hairy beasts were not the direct ancestors of today's elephants, but they were part of the same larger family called Elephantidae. That means they shared a common ancestor long ago. For hundreds of thousands of years, woolly mammoths wandered across the wide, frozen lands of the Northern Hemisphere, from Europe and Asia to North America. They became symbols of the Pleistocene epoch, a time filled with icy winds, snowy plains, and giant animals. When people think of the Ice Age, they often imagine a woolly mammoth with its thick fur, long curved tusks, and mighty body moving across the frozen steppe. In size, woolly mammoths were quite similar to today's African elephants, though they were usually more compact and sturdy. Adult males could grow as tall as 3.5 meters, that's about 11 feet, at the shoulder, and they could weigh up to 6 metric tons, which is around 13,000 pounds. But what really made them stand out was how perfectly they were built for the freezing cold. Their thick coat of shaggy fur was their most important defense against the icy winds and snowstorms. This coat was often a dark brown or reddish-brown colour, and in some places, like their sides and bellies, the hair could grow as long as 90 centimetres, or about 3 feet. Underneath this outer layer was a dense undercoat of soft wool, which added even more warmth. It worked just like a cosy blanket, trapping warm air close to their skin and helping them survive in the bitter cold. But their fur wasn't the only thing keeping them warm. Woolly mammoths also had a thick layer of fat beneath their skin, sometimes up to 10 centimetres, about 4 inches, thick. This blubbery layer not only helped keep them warm, but also gave them energy during tough winters when food was hard to find. Their ears and tails were much smaller than those of modern elephants. This may seem like a small detail, but it was very important. Short ears and tails meant less body heat escaped into the cold air. Like modern elephants, they had a long trunk, which they used for all kinds of tasks, picking up food, drinking water, smelling their surroundings, and even communicating with one another. One of the most eye-catching features of the woolly mammoth was its huge, spiraled tusks. These ivory giants could grow up to 4.2 meters long. That's nearly 14 feet if you followed the curve. On older mammoths, the tusks often curved outward and then back in again, sometimes crossing at the tips. But these tusks weren't just for show. Woolly mammoths used them for very practical purposes. One of their main jobs was helping the mammoths dig through snow to reach the grass hidden underneath. In a way, they were like giant snowplows attached to their heads. The tusks were also used in fights, either to compete with other males for mates or to protect themselves from hungry predators. And like a peacock's tail or a lion's mane, the large, beautiful tusks may have served as a signal of strength and health, helping attract mates. When it came to eating, woolly mammoths were plant eaters or herbivores, and they were especially good at grazing. They mostly ate grasses, along with sedges and other low-lying plants. Their favourite home was the Mammoth Steppe, a huge cold grassland filled with tough plants that could survive harsh conditions. Even though grasses made up most of their diet, scientists have found bits of shrubs, moss, and even small trees inside the stomachs of frozen mammoth remains. That means they were flexible and could eat whatever was available, especially when their usual food became scarce. Because of their massive size, woolly mammoths needed to eat huge amounts of food every single day, likely several 100 kilograms of plants. They spent many hours each day foraging, walking long distances to find enough to fill their giant bellies. The world of the woolly mammoth was mostly flat, cold, and open. Their favourite environment was the treeless tundra and dry grasslands that stretched across the northern parts of Earth. From Western Europe through Siberia, across the ancient land bridge of Beringia, and deep into North America, as far south as what is now the central part of the United States, these animals adapted to live in some of the coldest places on the planet. Thanks to their thick fur, heavy fat, and special tusks, they could survive conditions that would have been deadly to other creatures. Just like today's elephants, woolly mammoths were social animals that lived in family groups called herds. These herds were usually led by a wise and older female called a matriarch. Herd life gave them many advantages. Together, they were safer from terrifying Ice Age predators like saber-toothed cats, giant wolves, and cave lions. A group of mammoths could band together to fight off attacks, especially when calves were involved. They also helped each other find food, with older members leading the way to familiar feeding spots. Herd life was especially important for raising the young, who needed protection, warmth, and guidance to survive in such a dangerous world. Woolly mammoths weren't just giant grass eaters. They played a big role in shaping their environment. Scientists call them ecosystem engineers because their daily habits had huge effects on the land. By constantly eating grass and trampling the ground, they kept forests from growing too thick and helped maintain the wide open grasslands. Their feet broke up the soil, letting air and water reach deep underground. Their droppings were rich in nutrients, helping new plants grow. They also helped spread seeds across the land, since many seeds passed through their digestive system and grew in new places after being dropped. All of this activity made the Mammoth Steppe a livelier, healthier place, filled with plants and animals that depended on the mammoth's presence. However, woolly mammoths were important not just to the animals of the Ice Age, but also to early humans. People hunted them for food, used their hides for shelter and clothing, and carved tools and artwork from their ivory tusks. Today, thanks to frozen remains found in the icy soils of Siberia, scientists have been able to study their bodies in incredible detail. These remains have revealed everything from what they ate to how they lived, and even what they looked like. Because of this, woolly mammoths have become one of the best-known creatures from the ancient frozen world, helping us understand life during the last great ice age. The American mastodon, known scientifically as Mammuth americanum, was one of the most remarkable giant animals that walked the Earth during the last ice age. These creatures were part of a larger group called proboscideans, which also includes elephants and mammoths. Although they looked quite similar to woolly mammoths, with their massive size, long tusks, and shaggy coats, mastodons were actually very different animals, both in how they looked and how they lived. They followed a different evolutionary path and belonged to a separate biological family. Mastodons first appeared in North America around 3,700,000 years ago. They managed to survive for millions of years, finally going extinct roughly 10,500 years ago, near the end of the last ice age. In terms of appearance, mastodons were sturdy and muscular. They weren't towering giants, but they were still impressively large. A full-grown mastodon could stand up to 3 meters tall at the shoulder, that's about 10 feet, making them similar in height to today's Asian elephants or middle-sized mammoths. But their bodies were more solid and compact, with shorter, thicker legs. Their heads were not as tall or rounded as those of mammoths. They had flatter skulls and a lower profile overall. Although they are not as famous for their fur as woolly mammoths, mastodons likely had thick coats of shaggy hair as well, especially those living in colder regions. This hairy covering helped keep them warm in chilly, forested environments. One of their most eye-catching features was their long, powerful tusks. Unlike the twisted, curved tusks of the mammoths, mastodon tusks were usually straighter, shorter, and more cone-shaped. Older males could grow tusks that reached up to 5 meters long, that's about 16 feet. These tusks weren't just for show. Mastodons probably used them to dig up roots, tear bark from trees, and maybe even to fight each other for mates or territory. But what truly set mastodons apart from mammoths was their teeth, and what those teeth reveal about their diets. If you were to look inside a mastodon's mouth, you'd find large molars covered in blunt cone-shaped bumps. These are called mammaliform cusps, which is actually where the name mastodon comes from. These teeth were perfect for chewing tough, woody plants like twigs, small branches, and leaves. In other words, mastodons were browsers. They ate mostly the vegetation found in forests and woodlands. Mammoths, by contrast, had flat teeth with long ridges, ideal for grinding tough grasses. That made them grazers, who fed on the open grassy plains. This difference in tooth shape shows that the two giants didn't compete directly for food. They had their own favourite places to live and eat. Fossilised remains of mastodon stomach contents and even preserved dung have been found containing pine needles, spruce branches, mosses, and water plants, confirming their forest-based, browsing diet. Because of this diet, mastodons were drawn to specific types of environments. Unlike mammoths that roamed the wide, cold, windy grasslands, mastodons preferred cooler forests, woodlands, and especially wet, swampy places. They were commonly found near ponds, lakes, and slow-moving rivers, anywhere with lots of trees and shrubs and plenty of soft, wet ground. These places gave them not only food, but also protection from harsh winds and deep snow. As the Ice Age began to end and forests expanded, these habitats actually grew for a while, but then they changed too fast. That rapid change would later become a serious problem for the mastodons. The American mastodon had a wide range across North America. Fossils have been discovered from as far north as Alaska and Canada, all the way south through the United States, reaching Florida in the southeast and even into central Mexico in the southwest. As the great ice sheets of the Ice Age moved forward and melted back again, the mastodons followed the forests. When the weather got colder, they moved southward, keeping close to the cold-loving coniferous trees. When things warmed up, they moved north again into newly emerging woodlands. Though the famous American mastodon lived only in North America, earlier members of the mastodon family once lived in parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa too, showing that their ancient story began long before they arrived in the Americas. When it comes to behaviour, mastodons may have been less social than mammoths. They likely lived in small groups led by females and made up of mothers and their young. Grown-up males, however, probably lived alone or in smaller, more scattered groups. These animals used their strong trunks to pull down leaves and strip branches from trees, while their tusks helped them dig up roots and get through tough underbrush. Their strong, low-to-the-ground bodies were perfect for moving through thick woods and wet, muddy swamps, unlike the taller, grassland-adapted mammoths. Mastodons shared their world with early humans in North America for thousands of years, especially the Paleo-Indians. Archaeological discoveries, including bones with cut marks, show that these ancient people did hunt mastodons. They probably used them for meat, hides, and ivory. However, mastodons don't seem to have been hunted as often as mammoths. Even so, as the Ice Age ended, two big challenges hit them at the same time. One was the changing climate. Warming temperatures reshaped forests and dried up wetlands, reducing the habitats mastodons needed. The other was the growing number of skilled human hunters spreading across the continent. The combination of habitat loss and hunting pressure proved too much. Around 10,500 years ago, the American mastodon disappeared forever, marking the end of yet another amazing chapter in the story of the Ice Age giants. Long ago, during the Ice Age, a truly astonishing creature roamed the wetlands, rivers, and lakes of North America. The giant beaver, a member of the now extinct genus Castoroides. This beaver wasn't just big, it was huge, about the size of a black bear. It lived during a time scientists call the Pleistocene epoch, which lasted from about 2.5 million years ago to around 11,700 years ago. Two main species of giant beaver are recognised today. One is Castoroides dilophodus, which lived mainly in the southeastern parts of the United States, like Florida and South Carolina. The other, more widespread species is Castroides ohioensis, which was found across much of the United States and Canada. A third name, Castroides lesiorum, was once used for fossils found in Florida, but experts now agree that these remains really belong to C. Dilophodus, so the name lesiorum is no longer considered valid. The giant beaver was far bigger than the beavers we know today. On average, it was about 1.9 meters long, but some individuals could grow up to 2.2 meters. These animals were also very heavy, weighing anywhere from 90 kilograms to 125 kilograms. However, some newer studies suggest that they may have been a little lighter, closer to 77 kilograms or 170 pounds, though this is still debated among scientists. The structure of their bodies was quite different from modern beavers. They had much larger hind feet, but their back legs were shorter and their tails were longer, though it is not clear if they were flat and paddle-shaped like today's beaver tails. It's likely they had webbed feet to help them swim, but this cannot be confirmed for sure. One of the most striking features of the giant beaver was its enormous front teeth called incisors. Unlike modern beavers whose teeth are smooth, the giant beaver's teeth had a grooved, textured surface. These massive teeth could grow up to 15 centimeters long, or about 6 inches, and had strong enamel ridges that probably acted like beams to support their length and strength. Their jaws were built for a powerful bite, as shown by the deep muscles attached to the lower jaw. Despite their similar appearance, the giant beavers were not close relatives of the beavers we see today. Scientists believe their lineages split somewhere between 16 and 20 million years ago. The giant beaver belonged to a different group entirely, called the Castoroidinae, which was a North American branch of ancient beavers. Their ancestors included other now extinct animals like Monosaulax, Eucasta, and Procastoroides, leading up to the mighty Castoroides, which was the last and largest of them all. The first fossils of Castoroides were found back in the year 1837 in a peat bog in the state of Ohio. This is why the species was given the name ohioensis. Since then, fossils of the giant beaver have been found in many parts of North America. In the United States, their remains are especially common in the Midwestern states, like Illinois and Indiana, and in areas near the Great Lakes. Fossils have also been discovered as far north as Alaska and the Yukon in Canada, and as far south as Florida. In Canada, some of the best preserved fossils have been found in the Old Crow Basin in the Yukon. A forgotten fossil skull found in 1891 near Highgate, Ontario, turned out to be the earliest known record of castoroids in Canada. Fossils have also been uncovered in Toronto, Ontario, and on Indian Island in New Brunswick. The discovery in New Brunswick expanded our understanding of how rich the Ice Age animal life once was in that region. The southeastern species C. Dilophodus has been found at more than 25 Ice Age fossil sites across Florida, many of them from a period known as the Ranchlabrian, and others dating to earlier times like the Irvingtonian and the Blancan. Fossils from South Carolina's Cooper River site date between 1.8 million and 11,000 years ago. A fossil once called C. lesiorum, named in 1995 for bones found in Florida's Leasey Shell Pit, is now understood to be part of C. Dilophodus. Unlike modern beavers that eat mainly woody plants, the giant beaver probably ate soft underwater vegetation, plants that grew beneath the surface of lakes and swamps. Scientists think it did not build dams or lodges, unlike today's beavers. Its big, grooved teeth would not have been well suited to cutting down trees, suggesting that it lived a different kind of life, one that was more dependent on wetland environments for food and safety from predators. The giant beaver started to disappear from places like Alaska and the Yukon around 75,000 years ago, most likely due to the harsh climate changes that made the environment too cold and dry. Eventually the species went extinct during the late Pleistocene extinctions, a wave of die-offs that affected many large Ice Age animals, including mammoths and mastodons. This extinction occurred around the same time that the Clovis people, early humans in North America, began spreading across the continent about 12,800 years ago. There has long been debate about whether it was climate change or human hunting, known as the Overkill Hypothesis, that drove these species to extinction, or a combination of both. By the time the Ice Age ended and the Holocene epoch began, castoroids had disappeared from the continent. The last known populations of giant beavers lived in the lowlands just south of the Great Lakes, especially in Ohio and New York. Radiocarbon dating of fossils shows that the final castroids in New York lived between 11,501 and 12,050 years ago, overlapping with Paleo-Indian humans by as much as 1,000 years. However, no clear evidence shows that people hunted or used giant beavers. Their extinction may have been caused by loss of wetland habitats, changing forests, and cooler, drier conditions that spread during the last glacial period. As wetlands shrank, the beavers likely lost both their food supply and shelter. Interestingly, stories of giant beavers appear in the ancient oral traditions of First Nations peoples like the Innu, Mississaugas, Wabanaki, and Anishinaabe. Some of these myths may be based on real encounters with the animals, or their fossilized bones. For example, in 1972, American ethnologist Jane Beck suggested that the Algonquin legend of a monster beaver who built a dam so massive that it nearly turned the river into a sea might have been inspired by Castoroides ohioensis. In this story, the hero Glooskap destroyed the dam with his axe, forming the reversing falls in today's St. John River. As Glooskap chased the fleeing beaver, he created many islands in the river. Some Anishinaabe stories describe giant beavers that walked on two legs and were as tall as the tallest men. Whether or not these tales are literal memories of ancient encounters, they suggest that giant beavers once left a deep impression on the human imagination. Although the giant beaver is now extinct, its legacy is still recognized today. In the year 2025, the species Castoroides ohioensis was officially named the state fossil of Minnesota, a fitting tribute to one of the most fascinating creatures of the Ice Age. The woolly rhinoceros, known to scientists as Quelodonta antiquitatis, was one of the most unforgettable and well-adapted animals of the Ice Age. These huge, shaggy creatures thrived in the cold, dry and windswept grasslands, called the Mammoth Steppe, that once stretched across Europe and Asia. They first appeared around 350,000 years ago and managed to survive until about 10,000 years ago. That means they walk the earth at the same time as both the mighty woolly mammoths and early humans, including Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Their story gives us an incredible glimpse into life during the bitterly cold days of the Pleistocene epoch. When it came to size and strength, the woolly rhinoceros was an absolute giant. It was roughly the same size as today's white rhinoceros, but it had a stockier, more muscular build, perfectly suited for surviving in freezing environments. Adult males could grow up to 12.5 feet long from nose to tail and stand about 6.5 feet tall at the shoulders. These animals were incredibly heavy, weighing up to 3 metric tons, or more than 6,600 pounds. To survive the Ice Age cold, the woolly rhinoceros had an incredibly thick coat of shaggy fur, which was usually reddish-brown or dark brown. Beneath this long outer layer was a dense undercoat, which helped trap body heat, just like the wool of a mammoth. Beneath their skin, they likely had a thick layer of fat that added extra insulation and served as an emergency energy source when food became scarce during the long winters. Their body was compact, with short, powerful legs and a noticeable hump over their shoulders. This hump may have been made of strong muscles to support their massive horn, or it may have stored fat, just like the humps of camels. Their ears were small and their tails were short, both designed to keep them from losing too much heat. Common features in animals that live in extremely cold places. The most eye-catching feature of the woolly rhinoceros was its huge horn, or sometimes 2 horns, right on its snout. The main horn, which sat on the nose, could grow longer than 3 feet, and was flattened from side to side with a gentle backward curve. It was made of keratin, the same tough material found in our fingernails and hair. Some woolly rhinos had a smaller second horn right behind the main one. The main horn had several important uses. One of its most essential jobs was acting like a snow shovel, sweeping away thick layers of snow to uncover grasses and other plants hidden underneath. Fossils show that these horns were worn down in ways that prove they were constantly digging and scraping. But the horn wasn't just for finding food, it also served as a powerful weapon. Woolly rhinos could use it to defend themselves from predators like cave lions and dire wolves. Males probably also used their horns in fights over territory or mates during the breeding season. When it came to eating, the woolly rhinoceros was a grazer, meaning it mostly ate grasses. But these weren't soft, green lawns. These were tough, dry, fibrous grasses and sedges that could survive the cold steppe climate. To chew such rough food, the woolly rhino had special high-crowned teeth, called hypsodont teeth, which kept growing and could handle a lot of wear from grinding down gritty, silica-filled plants. Their strong jaws and likely thick, muscular lips helped them pull up and chew large amounts of grass. In winter, when snow blanketed the ground, they used their horn to dig through it, or switched to eating dried grasses and hardy plants that still poked through the snow. The woolly rhinoceros lived in cold, open places with very few trees, lands known as tundra steppe or mammoth steppe. These environments covered vast stretches of the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age. The animals roamed far and wide from the British Isles in the west, across Europe and Siberia, and as far east as parts of China and Korea. Interestingly, they were never found in North America, so their home was entirely in Eurasia. Their range shifted over time, expanding southward during colder glacial periods and retreating northward during warmer times. Some of the best preserved remains of woolly rhinos have been found frozen in the permafrost of Siberia. These incredible discoveries include not only fur and skin, but also internal organs, giving scientists an amazing look into how they lived and what they looked like. As for how they lived, woolly rhinos were probably more solitary than some of their Ice Age neighbours. Unlike woolly mammoths, which lived in large herds, woolly rhinos likely lived alone or in small family groups, maybe just a mother and her calf. With their massive size and strong horns, they could defend themselves well and didn't need the safety of the large groups. While they weren't known for migrating long distances, they likely moved with the seasons to find fresh grazing lands. During mating seasons, males may have fought one another to win the right to mate with females, using their horns as weapons in fierce battles. Woolly rhinos shared their icy world with early humans. For tens of thousands of years, both Neanderthals and modern humans hunted these massive animals. Archaeological digs have uncovered woolly rhino bones marked with cuts from stone tools, often found near human campsites. These creatures provided meat, hides for clothing or shelter, and possibly even horns used as tools or for cultural purposes. Their importance to early people is clear in prehistoric cave art, like the stunning paintings in Chauvet Cave in France, where woolly rhinos are carefully and powerfully drawn. These images show how deeply humans respected and remembered these beasts. But around 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the woolly rhinoceros vanished. Their extinction likely happened because of a mix of reasons. As the earth warmed quickly, the cold, grassy steppe began to shrink. Forests spread, pushing out the plants that woolly rhinos needed to survive. At the same time, growing human populations may have hunted them more often. The combined pressure of disappearing habitat and human hunting likely pushed these magnificent creatures toward extinction. Though they are long gone, the story of the woolly rhinoceros still speaks to us today. Through their bones, frozen bodies, and even ancient artwork, we can piece together their tale, a tale of strength, survival, and the great changes that shaped the Ice Age world. During the long and icy chapters of Earth's history, known as the Ice Age, the frozen lands of Eurasia were not only filled with enormous plant-eating animals, but also with some of the most powerful meat-eating beasts that ever lived. These fearsome hunters were specially adapted to survive in the cold, open plains and snowy forests of the time. Among the most impressive of these predators were the European cave lion and the mighty cave bear, two different animals, each ruling their own corner of the ancient wilderness. These two giants didn't just dominate their environments, they helped shape them. For thousands of years, they lived side by side with early humans, sometimes clashing with them over food and shelter. Their bones, and even their images painted on cave walls, still tell us stories of that wild and frozen world. Let's begin with the European cave lion, known to scientists as Panthera spelaea. This lion was one of the largest wild cats ever to walk the earth. In fact, it was much bigger than the lions we see today in Africa or Asia. Some experts believe it was a special type of lion, while others think it may have been a completely different species. Adult male cave lions could grow as long as 2.5 meters. That's about 8 feet long, not including the tail. They could weigh up to 350 kilograms, or around 770 pounds. That means they were about 10 to 15% bigger than today's largest lions. These lions had thick, muscular bodies built for power rather than speed. Fossils and ancient cave paintings show that they likely had shorter legs and broad chests. Unlike many African lions today, cave lions probably had little or no mane at all, as shown in ancient art found deep within European caves. Because they were not built for running long distances, these lions likely hunted by ambush, sneaking up close to their prey and then attacking with a sudden burst of speed and strength. They lived mostly on cold grasslands and open steppes, wide, flat areas filled with grazing animals. Their prey included some of the biggest herbivores of the Ice Age, like young woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, wild horses, and possibly even the mighty Irish elk. These lions likely attacked by aiming for the throat or neck, either suffocating their victims or breaking their necks with powerful bites. There is still some debate among scientists about whether cave lions hunted alone or in groups like modern lions do, but many believe that they did cooperate, especially because some of the animals they hunted were far too large for a single lion to bring down. Bones of cave lions found together in the same caves, sometimes even showing signs of healed injuries, suggest that they might have shared kills, raised cubs together, or at least lived in loose groups. Living alongside these powerful lions was the cave bear, known scientifically as Ursus spelaeus. This was one of the largest bear species ever known, and it was quite different from today's brown bears or polar bears, although they all share a common ancestor. Cave bears were mainly found in Europe and could grow to an enormous size. Adult males could stand up to 3.5 meters tall, that's over 11 feet, when on their hind legs. They could weigh up to 1,000 kilograms, or around 2,200 pounds. Cave bears had huge, dome-shaped heads, strong limbs, and big, flat teeth, perfect for chewing plants. Although they looked terrifying, these bears were mostly plant eaters. Their teeth and jaws were built not for tearing flesh, but for grinding up tough vegetation. Scientific studies of the chemicals in their bones also show that most of their diet came from plants like roots, berries, and herbs. One of the most important parts of a cave bear's life was hibernation. During the coldest and darkest months of the year, food would become very scarce. To survive, these bears would find a safe cave, curl up and sleep through the winter. That's how they got their name, cave bear, because their bones have been found in large numbers in caves all across Europe. Sadly, many bears died during hibernation due to starvation, illness, or other causes. This is one reason why we have so many well-preserved cave bear skeletons today. When spring returned, the bears would wake up hungry and spend the warmer months eating as much vegetation as they could. They needed to build up fat reserves to survive the next long winter sleep. Both the European cave lion and the cave bear played huge roles in their Ice Age ecosystems. The cave lion was clearly the top predator, helping keep the populations of large plant eaters in balance. Its disappearance would have caused ripple effects throughout the food chain. The cave bear, though not a hunter, was still one of the biggest animals around. Its size alone made it a powerful presence. Even though it mostly ate plants, it may have sometimes eaten meat when the chance came, like scavenging dead animals or eating small creatures. So, while it wasn't a fearsome hunter like the lion, it was still a major force in the ecosystem as a giant herbivore and occasional scavenger. Interestingly, these two massive animals likely competed at times, especially over caves. Caves were precious real estate in the Ice Age. Bears needed them for hibernation, and humans also sought shelter in them. Lions may have used them as dens or ambush points, and in some cases cave lions may have even preyed on young or weak bears. For thousands of years, both the cave lion and the cave bear shared the land with early humans, such as Neanderthals and early modern humans. People hunted them for their meat and fur, and their images appear in ancient cave paintings, showing how deeply these animals affected the lives and imaginations of our ancestors. Sometimes humans and cave bears even competed for the same caves, which could lead to conflict or cause stress for bear populations. Sadly, both of these incredible creatures eventually vanished. The cave bear disappeared first, around 27,000 years ago, while the cave lion survived a little longer, going extinct about 10,000 years ago. Their extinction was likely caused by a combination of changing climate, which affected their food sources, hunting by humans, and competition for space and resources. Though they are gone now, the stories of the cave lion and cave bear still live on, in bones buried deep beneath the earth, in paintings on ancient cave walls, and in the mystery and wonder of the Ice Age world they once ruled. The Irish elk, whose scientific name is Megaloceros giganteus, was one of the most breathtaking and mysterious species of deer that ever walked the earth. Despite what its name suggests, this giant wasn't only found in Ireland, and it wasn't a true elk either. In fact, it was more closely related to today's fallow deer than to North America's moose, which are sometimes called elk there. Still, because so many of its well-preserved fossils were found in Ireland, the name Irish elk stuck and became popular. What made this ancient animal truly unforgettable were its massive antlers, the largest ever seen on any known deer species. These towering antlers could reach an astonishing width of around 12 feet from tip to tip, making them a symbol of power and majesty during the Ice Age. The Irish elk first appeared in the fossil record about 400,000 years ago, and it managed to survive until roughly 7,600 years ago, living through many changes in climate and environment. But the antlers were just one part of its awe-inspiring appearance. The Irish elk had a huge and muscular body. Adult males could grow as tall as 7 feet at the shoulder, about as tall as a basketball hoop. They could weigh as much as 1,300 pounds, and some may have been even heavier. Their strong legs helped them move across wide plains, rolling hills and open woodlands. Female Irish elk were much smaller, and like all modern female deer, they didn't have antlers. The coat of the Irish elk was probably thick and warm, especially in colder climates, though we don't have exact evidence of its colour or texture. Now let's talk more about those amazing antlers. A single pair could weigh as much as 88 pounds, and they weren't just long, they were wide and flat, with a shape that looked like two enormous bony shovels, each dotted with many pointed tips called tines. These were known as palmated antlers, meaning the antlers were broad and flattened instead of narrow and pointed like in some other deer. And here's something truly incredible. These antlers were not permanent. Every single year, male Irish elk would shed them and grow them all over again from scratch. That meant they had to gather huge amounts of energy, food and minerals like calcium and phosphorus to build these gigantic structures over and over. But why would a deer grow such enormous antlers? Scientists believe the main reason was sexual selection. In many deer species, males with bigger and more impressive antlers are more attractive to females during the mating season. These antlers serve as a signal that says, "I am healthy, strong and well fed. Choose me as your mate." So, growing and showing off these massive antlers helped males compete for female attention and pass on their genes. During the rut, or mating season, male Irish elk probably used their antlers as both a display and a weapon. With such giant headgear, a male could impress nearby females and scare off rivals without even having to fight. The sheer size and symmetry of the antlers likely acted as a warning to other males. Don't mess with me. In cases where fights did happen, the antlers were probably used in ritualized battles, more like pushing matches than deadly duels. The broad, flat surfaces of the antlers allowed the animals to lock antlers and push against each other, like a test of strength and endurance, rather than trying to injure each other. These types of sparring contests are still seen in many deer species today. They help determine which male is dominant without causing serious harm. It's not likely that the antlers were meant for defense against predators. While they might have helped in a direct fight, most deer, including the Irish elk, relied on their speed, strength and awareness to escape danger, rather than standing their ground. As for what they ate, the Irish elk had a flexible diet. They were mixed feeders, meaning they ate both grass and leafy plants from bushes and trees. This ability to switch between grazing and browsing gave them an advantage in changing environments. However, growing those enormous antlers each year meant they needed food that was especially rich in minerals and nutrients. Their favourite places to live were likely open grasslands, cold steppe regions and lightly forested areas, where they could easily move around and find plenty of food. They avoided dense forests, where their giant antlers would get caught in trees, and they also stayed away from frozen tundras with poor vegetation. Even though they're called the Irish elk, these animals were widespread across Eurasia. Fossils have been discovered from Ireland and Great Britain in the west, across Central Europe, all the way to Siberia and parts of China in the east. Their range expanded and shrank depending on the climate. During warmer periods, when the land was covered in open meadows and forest was sparse, they moved north. During colder times, as ice sheets spread southward, the herds would retreat to warmer regions. Interestingly, the last known population of Irish elk survived in western Siberia, staying alive until about 7,600 years ago, long after they had disappeared from places like Western Europe. Like many large Ice Age animals, the Irish elk likely lived in small to medium-sized herds, though probably not in the massive groups like mammoths or bison. These herds may have moved with the seasons, searching for food-rich areas. Males especially would have needed excellent feeding grounds to support the energy it took to grow their antlers each year. During the rut, males would gather, show off their antlers, and challenge each other in displays of strength to win the chance to mate. The Irish elk also lived alongside early humans, including both Neanderthals and early modern Homo sapiens. Evidence from ancient archaeological sites shows that humans did hunt these deer and used them for food. Their dramatic appearance may have also inspired prehistoric art, as cave paintings have been found showing large antlered deer, possibly the Irish elk itself. Sadly, like many other giant animals of the Ice Age, the Irish elk eventually went extinct. Their disappearance seems to have happened later than that of many other Ice Age creatures. Scientists believe the reasons include climate change, which led to the growth of thick forests and the loss of the open grasslands the Irish elk needed. Also, growing such enormous antlers may have become too costly as food became harder to find. Human hunting may have played a role as well, adding more pressure to a species already struggling to survive. The Irish elk remains one of the most extraordinary and unforgettable animals from our planet's ancient past, a powerful symbol of nature's creativity, strength, and vulnerability all at once. The dire wolf, known to science as Enochion, was a large and powerful type of extinct wild dog that once roamed the Americas during the final part of the Ice Age. It lived during a time known as the Late Pleistocene and Early Holocene epochs, which lasted from around 125,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago. This mighty predator was officially named in the year 1858, just 4 years after the first fossil of the species was discovered. Over time, scientists have proposed that there may have been two different subspecies, Enochion gildae and Enochion. However, more recent studies have raised doubts about whether these truly were separate subspecies. The most famous site where dire wolf bones have been uncovered is the Rancho La Brea tar pits in what is now Los Angeles, California. In fact, that site has provided more dire wolf fossils than any other place on Earth. Fossils of dire wolves have been found in many different environments, ranging from wide grasslands and open plains to forested mountain areas in North America, and even in the dry savannas of South America. These animals lived at a wide range of elevations, from sea level all the way up to about 2,255 meters, or around 7,400 feet high. However, they were rarely found north of the latitude known as 42 degrees north. Only 5 possible finds have ever been reported from farther north, and none of them have been fully confirmed. Scientists believe this limited northern range was likely due to cold temperatures, lack of prey, or unsuitable habitats caused by the massive ice sheets, the Laurentide and Cordilleran glaciers that once covered much of North America. When it comes to size, the dire wolf was about as large as the biggest modern-day grey wolves, such as the Yukon wolf and the northwestern wolf. The subspecies Enochion gildae weighed around 60 kilograms, or roughly 132 pounds, while Enochion averaged about 68 kilograms, or 150 pounds. Although the skull and teeth of the dire wolf looked similar to those of the grey wolf, the dire wolf had bigger teeth and a stronger bite, especially at the canine teeth. These traits likely helped it tear through the thick hides and flesh of large Ice Age herbivores. Its diet probably included animals such as the western horse, dwarf pronghorn, flat-headed peccary, giant ground sloths, ancient bison, and prehistoric camels. Dire wolves were still roaming the land as recently as 10,000 years ago, just before they vanished during what scientists call the Quaternary extinction event. This massive wave of extinctions wiped out many large animals, and the dire wolf may have died out because it depended heavily on those large herbivores. Other possible causes include climate change, competition with other predators like early humans and grey wolves, or perhaps a combination of all these factors. In terms of body shape, dire wolves were quite similar in size and build to the Yukon and northwestern wolves of today, which can grow up to 97 centimetres tall at the shoulder, that's about 38 inches, and measure up to 180 centimetres, or 69 inches in body length. Some dire wolves found at Rancho La Brea were even larger than that, while others were slightly smaller. One key difference was that dire wolves had bigger heads and smaller feet than grey wolves of the same body size. Their skulls could be as long as 310 millimetres, or about 12 inches, and they had a wider face, stronger jaw muscles, and more massive bones overall. A special ridge along the top of the skull called the sagittal crest was more pronounced, and other skull features, like the inion and nasal bones, were also quite distinct. Because the tar pits at Rancho La Brea often cause the skeletons to fall apart, it's rare to find a fully connected dire wolf skeleton there. However, scientists have managed to reconstruct some parts, such as sections of the spine, and found that dire wolves had the same number of vertebrae as modern wolves. Interestingly, scientists didn't realise there were different kinds of dire wolves until the year 1984, when they noticed differences in skulls and limbs from fossils found in California and Mexico belonging to A.D. gildae, compared to those from farther east of the Continental Divide belonging to A.D. dirus. The wolves from the west had shorter back legs, especially the tibia and metatarsal bones, making them less built for speed than wolves and coyotes. Their front legs were also shorter due to smaller humerus and radius bones. This likely made them more powerful, and suited for ambush hunting rather than long-distance chases. On the other hand, A.D. dirus from the east had much longer limbs, 14% longer in the front legs and 10% longer in the back legs compared to gildae. The bones in the arms and legs, like the humerus, radius, metacarpals, femur, tibia, and metatarsals, were all longer. This suggests that dirus may have been faster and more agile than gildae. The largest femur bone from a dire wolf was discovered in Carroll Cave, Missouri, and it measured 278 millimeters, or roughly 10.9 inches. Another unusual feature of the dire wolf, especially the males, is that the penis bone, known scientifically as the baculum, was very different in shape and size compared to all living wild dogs. A recent study in the year 2024 found that the dire wolf's baculum was proportionally longer than in any modern canid. This might suggest that dire wolves had fierce competition between males, possibly showing non-monogamous mating behaviours, which are uncommon among today's wolves. During a massive wave of extinctions known as the Quaternary extinction event, which happened about 12,700 years ago, the world lost many of its most impressive creatures. In total, around 90 different groups of large mammals that each weighed more than 44 kilograms, about 97 pounds, completely vanished from the earth. This included many of the giant meat-eaters and scavengers, which likely died out because the massive plant-eaters they relied on for food also disappeared. Scientists still debate why these enormous plant-eating animals, often called megafauna, went extinct in the first place. Some believe it was due to rapid and dramatic changes in the climate. Others argue that newly arrived human hunters may have overhunted them, pushing them to extinction. Still others think it may have been a combination of both human activity and environmental shifts. Because there is still so much we don't know, especially about where animals like the dire wolf lived, what they ate, and how they interacted with each other. Some researchers suggest we need to explore many different theories to fully understand what happened. Ancient DNA and radiocarbon tests show that over time, local groups of animals were often replaced by new ones from the same species or closely related species. Both the fearsome dire wolf and the Bringian wolf disappeared from North America. In their place, a smaller, more lightly built type of wolf, which was less meat-focused in its diet, managed to survive. This more adaptable wolf may have outcompeted the dire wolf and contributed to its extinction. One scientific study suggests that the dire wolf's family tree started in the Americas a very long time ago, which led to it becoming genetically isolated from other kinds of wolves. This isolation meant that when other canines like coyotes, grey wolves, dholes, and a now extinct type of wolf called Xenochion arrived in North America from Eurasia during the late Pleistocene, the dire wolf could not interbreed with them. This may have been a serious disadvantage. Other wolves and coyotes, for example, could mate with new arrivals, including domestic dogs, and pick up helpful genetic traits, such as resistance to foreign diseases. The dire wolf, being genetically isolated, could not do the same. A study published in the year 2023 found that many dire wolves and saber-toothed cats, Smilodon, from the La Brea tar pits in California, showed signs of a painful joint disease called osteochondrosis dissecans. This disease is sometimes seen in modern dogs that have been heavily inbred, so researchers suggested that dire wolves and Smilodon may have suffered from inbreeding as their populations dwindled near extinction. However, scientists also pointed out that more studies would be needed to know if this condition was common in dire wolves from other regions. As for the fossils themselves, the youngest dire wolf fossil found at the famous Rancho La Brea site in California was dated in the year 2019 to approximately 11,413 years ago, plus or minus 754 years. Another fossil, tested in the year 2022, showed a date of around 11,581 years ago, plus or minus 3,768 years. Other remains found in different locations give even more clues. One dire wolf bone from Brynjolfsson Cave in Missouri is about 9,440 years old, while other fossils from Rancho La Brea and La Mirada, California, are roughly 9,860 years old and 10,690 years old respectively. A few bones from Whitewater Draw in Arizona may be as recent as 8,200 years old, although some experts question the reliability of those tests. In South America, bones found in Talara, Peru are about 9,030 years old, while bones of a South American variant known as C. neringi from Luján, Argentina, are thought to be at least 10,000 to 11,000 years old. Over the years, people have tried to bring the image, or at least the appearance, of the dire wolf back to life. One such attempt began in the year 1988, when Lois Schwartz of the American Alsatian Breeders Association started the Dire Wolf Project. Her goal was not to clone or genetically recreate the real dire wolf, but instead to breed domestic dogs that looked like what she imagined a dire wolf might have looked like. To do this, she mixed German Shepherds and Alaskan Malamutes, then added English Mastiffs and Great Pyrenees to give the dogs a bigger, more powerful build. She also used Akitas for their shorter ears and Irish Wolfhounds to add height and length. By her own admission, this project was based more on imagination and the preferences of potential dog owners than on any scientific evidence about the actual prehistoric animal. In April of the year 2025, a company called Colossal Biosciences announced something much more ambitious: the birth of 3 genetically modified wolf pups. These pups were named Romulus and Remus, both 6 months old, and Khaleesi, a 2-month-old female. The scientists at Colossal said they made 20 specific genetic edits to 14 important genes in cells taken from grey wolves in order to make the pups look and behave more like dire wolves. No actual dire wolf DNA was used, but Colossal claimed these small changes were enough to revive the species in some form. However, many outside experts strongly disagreed. They argued that these pups were not true dire wolves by any scientific definition. The IUCN's Canid Specialist Group, which advises on the conservation of wild dog species, officially stated that these animals were not dire wolves, nor were they acceptable substitutes. They warned that trying to create lookalikes could confuse the public, pose risks to existing species like grey wolves, and distract from real conservation efforts. They also pointed out that changing an animal's appearance does not bring back an extinct species in any meaningful way. In response to the criticism, Colossal Biosciences released a public statement to explain how their Dire Wolf project aligns with conservation principles. Then, in May of the year 2025, the company's lead scientist, Beth Shapiro, clarified that the 3 pups are, in her words, grey wolves with 20 edits. She acknowledged that it is currently impossible to bring back a species exactly as it once was. The name dire wolf, she explained, was more of a nickname or casual term than a scientific claim. This statement was seen by many as a major shift from what the company had been saying before. Arctodus, also known as the short-faced bear, was one of the most fascinating and fearsome mammals to roam North America during the Ice Age. This extinct genus of bear lived from around 2,600,000 years ago until approximately 12,800 years ago, during a time known as the Pleistocene epoch. There were two species of Arctodus, the lesser short-faced bear, scientifically called Arctodus pristinus, and the giant short-faced bear, Arctodus simus. The lesser species, Arctodus pristinus, was mostly found in the eastern regions of what is now the United States and lived mainly during the early part of the Pleistocene. The giant species, Arctodus simus, was much more widespread and powerful, and it lived all across the United States, Canada, and Mexico during the later part of the Pleistocene. Although Arctodus simus evolved from A. pristinus, both species may have lived at the same time during the Middle Pleistocene. However, fossils of both species are rare, making them somewhat mysterious. Arctodus simus is now thought to have been one of the largest land-dwelling carnivores that ever lived in North America. Like many bears, it showed strong differences between males and females, a trait called sexual dimorphism. Adult males were much larger than females. Females usually weighed around 500 kilograms, while males averaged about 800 kilograms. The heaviest males may have reached over 950 kilograms and could stand up to 1.67 meters tall at the shoulder. When standing on their hind legs, these giants could reach a towering height of 3.4 meters. This bear was an omnivore, meaning it ate both plants and animals. It fed on vegetation as well as prey such as deer, tapirs, and camel-like animals. Though it preferred open woodlands with mild temperatures, it was highly adaptable and could live in many types of environments. Arctodus belonged to a group of bears called Tremarctini, which are native to the Americas. Within this group, Arctodus was the most widely spread species in North America. Still, both species only lived during the Pleistocene epoch. A. pristinus vanished around 300,000 years ago, while A. simus disappeared about 12,800 years ago during a wave of large animal extinctions. For A. pristinus, the reasons for extinction may have included changes in climate and competition with other bear species such as the black bear and Tremarctos floridanus. In contrast, A. simus may have died out due to the collapse of the ecosystems it depended on for food and shelter. Arctodus pristinus was similar in size to modern grizzly bears. In fact, it shared a similar body size with Tremarctos floridanus, and some males were about the same size as female Arctodus simus. In Florida, A. pristinus individuals averaged around 140 kilograms, but some from other regions such as Aguascalientes and Port Kennedy Bone Cave may have reached up to 400 kilograms. Some individuals of Arctodus simus may have been the largest land-dwelling carnivores to ever exist in North America. Standing upright, they measured between 2.4 meters and 3.4 meters, and when walking on all fours, they stood between 1 meter and 1.67 meters at the shoulder. The tallest males could meet an adult human eye to eye. Their average weight was around 625 kilograms, with the heaviest reaching almost 1,000 kilograms. Arctodus simus showed extreme sexual dimorphism. Some males were twice the size of females. As in the spectacled bear, which is its closest living relative, males were usually 30 to 40% larger than females. Male skulls often had a large sagittal crest, a ridge of bone used to anchor powerful jaw muscles, while females had smaller or no crests. A recent DNA study from the year 2025 confirmed this size difference by analysing remains from at least 31 individuals across 28 different sites in the United States and Canada. Although both Arctodus simus and Arctodus pristinus looked similar, they could be told apart by their teeth and bone structure. Arctodus simus had a shorter snout, longer limbs and heavier teeth. In contrast, A. pristinus had smaller and more widely spaced teeth. However, large males of A. pristinus could sometimes be confused with small females of A. simus. The skull of A. simus resembled that of modern hyenas in shape and proportions, suggesting some similarities in behaviour or diet. The best preserved skeleton of A. simus in the United States was discovered in Fulton County, Indiana, and is now housed at the Field Museum in Chicago. The name short-faced bear comes from their wide, deep snouts, which made their faces look shorter compared to modern bears. However, this look is somewhat misleading. Their snouts were actually deep rather than short, and this trait is shared with their closest living relative, the spectacled bear. Some researchers suggest that the broad snout may have supported a strong sense of smell or allowed the bear to swallow large chunks of food, much like modern hyenas do. The eyes of Arctodus were small compared to its large skull and faced more to the sides, suggesting that it did not rely heavily on depth perception like modern hunting animals. The structure of the inner ear suggests that A. pristinus held its head at a more tilted angle, possibly to help it see long distances. Meanwhile, the middle ear bones of A. simus were quite large, suggesting that it could hear low-frequency sounds well. When it comes to chewing and eating, Arctodus simus had teeth and jaws built more like plant-eating bears. It had large flat molars for grinding plants, a deep lower jaw, and powerful chewing muscles. These features helped it crush and chew tough plant material, even though its body was massive and resembled a predator. Its canines and premolars may have looked sharp and predatory, but the flatness of its back teeth suggests it also ate lots of vegetation. Studies on its jaws show that Arctodus simus had a very strong bite, stronger than modern bears and wolves, and nearly as powerful as lions. Its skull had special ridges for strong jaw muscles, allowing it to bite through bone or dense material. However, the structure of its teeth still matches that of an omnivore. Researchers found that its forearms were not especially powerful for grabbing prey compared to big cats, or even modern bears, though some experts believe they were still strong enough to pin down large animals or dig for roots and tubers. The arms and legs of Arctodus were long and straight, which gave the bear a somewhat tall and upright look. But this appearance may be misleading. Arctodus had a short torso, which made its legs seem longer than they were. These long limbs likely helped the bear travel efficiently across open landscapes. Its paws were long and narrow, and the toes were more evenly spaced than in modern bears. This gave Arctodus symmetrical feet with straighter toes, unlike today's bears, which have one toe that sticks out more than the others. Some fossil footprints found in Oregon and New Mexico show large paw prints with clear claw marks, oval-shaped pads, and hind feet that stepped ahead of the front ones, just like living bears. Arctodus also had a partial false thumb, a small bone that sticks out from the wrist. This feature, which is not found in most other bears, may have helped it grasp plants or climb trees, as seen in the spectacled bear today. One nearly complete skeleton of Arctodus simus shows signs of disease. The bear had bone deformities, abscesses in its mouth and legs, and signs of infection. Researchers think it may have suffered from a disease similar to syphilis, or perhaps a fungal infection or arthritis. Other fossils from Alaska and Missouri also show signs of healed injuries or dental disease. During a period known as the Middle Pleistocene, a species of short-faced bear called Arctodus pristinus vanished from the Earth. The last known evidence of this bear comes from a site called Coleman 2A in the state of Florida. Scientists believe several reasons may explain why Arctodus pristinus gradually disappeared. First, a larger and more dominant cousin, Arctodus simus, began to evolve and likely outcompeted pristinus. At the same time, other bear species such as the Florida spectacled bear, Tremarctos floridanus, and the black bear, Ursus americanus, were also thriving and competing for space and food. To make things more difficult, Florida's environment was changing, shifting from a hot, wet, and thickly forested land to a drier, more open landscape. These changes made it harder for Arctodus pristinus to survive. All of this likely happened during the late part of a time called the Irvingtonian faunal stage. There have been some disputed claims of Arctodus pristinus surviving into the late Pleistocene in places like South Carolina and California, but many scientists question the accuracy of those records. Most modern research agrees that A. pristinus lived from the boundary between the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs until the Middle Pleistocene, after which it disappeared. After Arctodus pristinus went extinct, its larger cousin, Arctodus simus, remained as the last living member of the Arctodus genus. This giant short-faced bear survived until about 12,800 years ago, making it one of the last big Ice Age animals, known as megafauna, to disappear in North America. It lived right up to the boundary between the Pleistocene and Holocene epochs, a transitional period that took place between about 13,800 and 11,400 years ago. One of the reasons Arctodus simus may have lasted so long is that it had a flexible diet. It could adapt its eating habits depending on where it lived, whether on a local or regional level. But even this adaptability was not enough to save it in the end. Several possible reasons have been proposed for the extinction of Arctodus simus. One major factor was the decline in large plant-eating animals that it may have preyed upon or scavenged. Another issue was the decreasing nutritional quality of plants caused by climate change. On top of that, this bear had to compete with other omnivores, like humans and brown bears, for food. However, not all scientists agree that brown bears were responsible for the extinction of Arctodus simus. In fact, many researchers believe that brown bears simply filled the ecological gap left behind by the disappearing short-faced bear. Brown bears were more adaptable and better suited for changing conditions. There is also no clear evidence that humans hunted Arctodus simus, or that people directly caused its extinction. Interestingly, fossil evidence from Rancho La Brea in California, famous for its tar pits, shows no signs of food shortages being a major issue for Arctodus simus or other large carnivores of the time. Their teeth do not show unusual wear that would indicate starvation. That said, changes in vegetation toward the end of the Pleistocene likely played a big role in the decline of this mighty bear. As the climate shifted, lush open woodlands were replaced by darker, denser forests. For example, on Vancouver Island around 13,500 years ago, pine-covered woodlands gave way to forests filled with spruce, mountain hemlock and red alder, trees that grow well in cooler, damper conditions. By about 12,450 years ago, this transformation was mostly complete, ushering in a colder phase known as the Younger Dryas. Even though Arctodus simus could live in different kinds of environments and was not limited to open areas, the timing of this widespread forest expansion likely affected its ability to find food. It was not alone. Many other Ice Age animals went extinct during the same period, likely for similar reasons. Another challenge for Arctodus simus was its low genetic diversity. Many fossil specimens show that these bears were closely related, meaning they did not have much variety in their DNA. This lack of diversity made them less able to adapt to environmental changes. In the past, the species had a richer genetic makeup, but their numbers shrank over time, especially before the last glacial maximum, a period of extreme cold that began more than 20,000 years ago. Interestingly, southern populations of Arctodus simus appear to have been closely related to those in Beringia, an ancient land bridge connecting Asia and North America, suggesting that both groups had been separated long before the last glacial maximum. This supports the idea that the bear's gene pool had already become limited by that point. The problem with having so little genetic diversity is that it limits a species' ability to bounce back from challenges. For example, the modern spectacled bear, another member of the Tremarctine bear family, also has low genetic diversity, but has not shown signs of a recent population crash. In contrast, brown bears had more diverse ancestral populations in Eurasia, which allowed them to re-enter North America more easily if their numbers declined. Arctodus simus did not have that luxury. If its local populations died out, there were no fresh waves of new bears to take their place. The youngest known fossils of Arctodus simus come from several locations. A specimen from Friesenhahn Cave in Texas was dated to around 12,700 years ago, based on radiocarbon testing. However, some scientists question the accuracy of this date because the collagen in the bones was degraded. Another fossil, a vertebra from Bonner Springs, Kansas, gave a more reliable date of around 12,800 years ago, based on well-preserved collagen. Yet a different test on that same bone from another lab produced a younger age of about 10,980 years ago. These varying results mean the bone could be anywhere from 9,510 to 11,021 years old, depending on how the data is interpreted. One more fossil from Huntington Dam in Utah has been more confidently dated to around 12,800 years ago, based on two separate radiocarbon tests. This supports the idea that Arctodus simus survived into the very end of the Ice Age, disappearing along with many other giant mammals as Earth's climate warmed and ecosystems transformed. During the Ice Age, more precisely during a time scientists call the Pleistocene epoch, which began around 2,600,000 years ago and ended about 12,000 years ago, there lived a group of truly remarkable kangaroos in Australia. These kangaroos belonged to an extinct group known as Procoptodon, which were unlike any kangaroos hopping around today. What made them stand out was their massive size and short, flat faces. These unique features earned them the name short-faced kangaroos, or sthenurins. Among all the species in this group, Procoptodon goliah was the true giant. It was the largest kangaroo that ever lived. Imagine an animal standing taller than most people, about 2 meters and 70 centimeters high, which is around 8 feet and 10 inches. And this towering creature wasn't just tall, it was heavy too, weighing up to 240 kilograms, which is around 530 pounds. That's heavier than 2 full-grown men. Other Procoptodon species were smaller in size, such as Procoptodon gilli, which was the tiniest of the group, standing just about 1 meter tall, or 3 feet and 3 inches. Although these ancient kangaroos looked a bit like modern ones, there were some major differences. For starters, their faces were flatter, and their eyes looked straight forward instead of to the side. Their feet had only one large toe or claw on each foot, which looked a lot like a horse's hoof. This hoof-like toe helped them move quickly through the open plains and dry forests, in search of leaves and grasses to eat. Each of their front paws had 2 long fingers tipped with strong claws. Scientists believe these claws may have been used to reach up and pull down branches, bringing leaves close enough to eat. These powerful limbs made them well adapted to a leaf-based diet, though some studies suggest they may have also grazed on tough grasses. Fossils of Procoptodon have been discovered mostly in the dry, sun-baked regions of South Australia and New South Wales. Back when they were alive, these areas were covered with dusty, windblown sand dunes and had very few trees. But around Lake Menindee in western New South Wales, the climate was wetter and cooler, and the land was a patchwork of forest, woodland, grassy savannas and open plains. Fossil footprints of these creatures have even been found on Kangaroo Island, giving us clues about where and how they lived. Now here's something really interesting. Despite being kangaroos, Procoptodon goliah probably didn't hop. That might sound surprising, but their enormous weight would have made hopping dangerous. If they tried, the stress on their leg tendons could have caused serious injuries. In fact, studies suggest that kangaroos heavier than about 60 kilograms, roughly 130 pounds, risk breaking tendons if they hopped too much. Since P. goliah weighed 4 times that amount, hopping was likely too risky. Instead of hopping, these giants likely walked in a very different way, on 2 legs, like humans do. Their wide hips and strong ankle joints helped support their heavy bodies 1 leg at a time, and they probably walked upright. They also had large buttocks, which would have helped them move steadily and support their weight. Unlike today's kangaroos that use their tail like a 5th leg when walking slowly, Procoptodon likely walked more like a human, putting all their weight on their legs and lifting their feet like they were wearing hooves. However, some scientists still debate whether P. goliah might have hopped at least a little. If it did, it would have been the largest hopping animal ever to walk the earth. But judging by their bones and how much stress their tendons would have experienced, it seems more likely they walked rather than bounced. These amazing creatures once lived side by side with the modern kangaroos we know today. But while modern kangaroos mostly eat grass, Procoptodon seem to prefer browsing on leaves and shrubs. Their powerful jaws and flat, heavy skulls were built for chewing tough vegetation. They had strong chewing muscles and large molars that helped them grind down their food. Some scientists have found clues in their tooth enamel and microscopic wear patterns on their teeth that suggest they ate dicot plants, those with broader leaves, not grasses. Interestingly, studies of chemical signals locked in their teeth reveal something even more amazing. The plants they ate used a special type of photosynthesis, called the C4 pathway, which is usually found in grasses. But in this case, it probably came from salt bushes, dry region plants common across arid parts of Australia. Over time, as the climate became drier in the later part of the Ice Age, P. goliah evolved to survive on these tougher, saltier plants. Because they ate so many salty plants, scientists think they had to live near water sources to balance out their salt intake. Yet their strong legs and bone structure suggest they were capable of walking long distances to find food and water when needed. They were widespread across Australia, with fossils found in places like the Narra Court Caves in South Australia, the Darling Downs in Queensland, and many other fossil sites. One of the best ways to experience these Ice Age giants today is to visit the Australian Museum, where a life-size replica of Procoptodon goliah stands on display, showing just how impressive these animals truly were. The giant short-faced kangaroo managed to survive in Australia until at least around 45,000 years ago. However, some scientists believe that a few members of this species might have lasted as recently as 18,000 years ago, before disappearing completely. There are two main ideas about why Pigalaya went extinct. One suggests that changing climate conditions during the Ice Age, also known as the Pleistocene epoch, played a role. The other points the finger at humans, who may have hunted them to extinction. Those who support the human hunting theory highlight that the arrival of people in mainland Australia happened at roughly the same time these giant kangaroos vanished. In fact, the climate during that period was relatively stable, which strengthens the argument that human activities may have been a key cause. But there's a mystery. Scientists have never found direct evidence, such as bones with cut marks or tools nearby, that shows humans actually hunted or ate Procoptodon galea. Some researchers also looked at what people did to the environment. They believe that early humans in Australia used fire to clear land, which changed the kinds of plants that grew. Nutritious plants that were sensitive to fire were replaced by tougher, less tasty ones. This environmental shift might have harmed Pigalaya and other large animals living at that time, around 50,000 years ago. But when scientists studied the actual diet of Pigalaya, they discovered it mostly ate salt bushes, especially plants like Atriplex and other chenopod's, which are less likely to burn and were not much affected by fires. So, it seems that food scarcity caused by burning plants probably wasn't the reason these kangaroos died out. There was also another problem. Unlike some other animals, these giant kangaroos had long and slow breeding cycles. This means that if their population started to drop, they couldn't bounce back quickly, so even a small amount of hunting by humans might have had a big impact on their numbers. Another interesting clue comes from their teeth. Kangaroos that live in dry desert-like areas today have thicker layers of enamel on their teeth. This happens because they get moisture indirectly by eating juicy plants. But when scientists looked at the teeth of P. galea from similar dry regions, they found much thinner enamel. This suggests that P. galea didn't rely on moisture from plants. It needed actual water sources like lakes, rivers, or ponds. This dependence on standing water made P. galea especially vulnerable during times of drought. In southern Australia, droughts became more common around 55,000 years ago. That likely put extra stress on the species. However, droughts weren't new to the region. They had been happening for about 7 million years, and P. galea had survived many dry spells before. In fact, serious drops in rainfall didn't happen until 5,000 to 10,000 years after these kangaroos had already gone extinct, and about 20,000 years before the last glacial maximum, which was the driest time of all. This makes it unlikely that drought alone was the final cause of their extinction. However, it seems likely that both climate and humans played a part in the downfall of P. galea. Because it needed regular access to water, it was less able to handle the drying of the land compared to modern kangaroos like the red kangaroo, which are more adapted to dry conditions. And since P. galea was very large, stood tall, and often lived in open scrublands, it would have been easy for humans, who also stayed close to water, to spot and hunt them. Even if there's no solid proof of humans eating them, their visibility and need for water might have made them an easy target for early human hunters. Around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, something incredible and puzzling happened on Earth. In a relatively short time, many of the world's largest and most impressive animals, the giants that had once ruled the land, suddenly disappeared. This event is known to scientists as the Quaternary extinction event, but many simply call it the Great Vanishing. What makes it so extraordinary is not just how many species were lost, but how quickly it all happened. These were animals that had survived and thrived for hundreds of thousands, some for even millions, of years. And yet, in just a blink of geological time, they were gone. Unlike the slow and steady extinctions that happen over long ages, this was a fast and dramatic event that swept across continents. Whole species vanished, leaving behind only their bones and fossilized footprints. It was as if someone had turned off a switch on the planet's largest and most powerful creatures. The scale of this extinction was enormous. In North America, about 73% of all large mammal groups disappeared. This included some of the most famous Ice Age animals like the woolly mammoth, the mastodon, the fierce saber-toothed cat, the dire wolf, the huge ground sloths, and the towering short-faced bear. In South America, the loss was even greater. Around 83% of the large mammals vanished. Among them were strange and amazing creatures like the Toxodon, which looked like a rhinoceros but was not related to one, and the Glyptodon, a massive armoured animal about the size of a small car. Australia suffered a similarly heartbreaking fate. Nearly 90% of its megafauna, the giant animals, went extinct. These included the giant short-faced kangaroo, the Diprotodon, a wombat-like creature as big as a rhinoceros, and the terrifying marsupial lion with powerful jaws and sharp claws. Even Eurasia, where humans and Ice Age animals had lived side by side for a long time, lost many of its great beasts. Animals like the woolly rhinoceros and the mighty European cave lion vanished forever, though the percentage of loss there was not as high as in the Americas or Australia. The one major exception to this global wave of extinctions was Africa. Surprisingly, Africa did not lose nearly as many of its large animals. This detail has fascinated scientists, as it might hold important clues about why so many animals elsewhere disappeared. What makes this mass extinction so strange is not just the number of species lost, but how quickly it happened. Extinction is a normal part of life on Earth. It has always happened. But this event was unusual. In just a few thousand years, a mere moment in Earth's long history, entire families of large animals that had survived countless ice ages suddenly vanished. The fact that most of the animals that disappeared were the largest ones, called megafauna, makes this mystery even more intriguing. Smaller animals like rabbits, rodents, birds, reptiles, and amphibians mostly survived. This suggests that the cause or causes of the extinction hit the large animals the hardest. The timing of this great loss is also key. It happened right at the end of the Pleistocene epoch, the last ice age, and at the beginning of our current age, the Holocene epoch, which brought warmer weather. During this time, the world went through major changes. Huge ice sheets melted, sea levels rose, forests and grasslands shifted, and the climate warmed rapidly. These changes would have created challenges for many species, especially the big ones that needed a lot of food and space to survive. But there was something else happening at the same time. A new predator was spreading across the globe, Homo sapiens or modern humans. As humans moved out of Africa and reached new lands, first Asia, then Australia, Europe and the Americas, something curious happened. In many places, the large animals began to disappear shortly after people arrived. This pattern has sparked a heated scientific debate. Some researchers believe climate change was the main cause. The warming Earth may have destroyed habitats, changed the types of plants that grew, and created stress that the big animals simply couldn't survive. Others believe that humans played a much larger role. This idea, known as the Overkill Hypothesis, suggests that skilled human hunters, armed with tools and teamwork, wiped out the megafauna quickly after arriving in new lands. Many scientists now think it wasn't just one cause, but a deadly combination: climate change and human hunting working together to push these species over the edge. Some have even proposed wilder ideas, like widespread disease outbreaks or even a comet or asteroid impact, but these remain more speculative. What's clear is that the Great Vanishing changed Earth forever. Losing the big herbivores and carnivores reshaped entire ecosystems. For example, when the mammoths and mastodons disappeared, the grasslands they helped maintain by grazing likely changed into forests or tundras. When top predators like saber-toothed cats and dire wolves vanished, the animals they once hunted may have multiplied at first, until new ecological balances formed. This was not just the extinction of a few species, it was a massive reorganization of life on Earth. Every continent except Africa was affected. The landscapes, the food chains, and the relationships between animals and plants were never the same again. Scientists have been trying to solve the mystery of the Great Vanishing for over 100 years, and while they may not agree on every detail, most now accept that both the environment and human activity played crucial roles. Understanding what happened back then is not just about curiosity. It teaches us important lessons about how ecosystems respond to rapid change and what happens when humans enter the scene. Today, as we face climate change, habitat loss, and a new wave of extinctions, the story of the Ice Age giants is more relevant than ever. It reminds us that even the biggest, strongest, and most iconic creatures are not immune to change, and that our actions can shape the future of life on Earth just as they shaped its past. The search for answers continues as scientists dig through ancient bones, study prehistoric tools, and decode ancient climates, all in the hope of understanding how and why the mighty beasts of the Ice Age met their end. Their story, frozen in time, still echoes today. One of the most well-known and long-discussed explanations for why and how so many large Ice Age animals vanished is the idea that climate change was to blame. According to this theory, the Earth went through a period of rapid and dramatic changes in temperature and environment near the end of the Pleistocene epoch, which is thought to be the main reason these enormous creatures disappeared. This period of major transformation happened roughly between 15,000 and 10,000 years ago. During this time, the Earth shifted from the icy, freezing conditions of the last glacial maximum to the warmer and more stable climate that we enjoy today, called the Holocene. But this change did not happen slowly or evenly. Instead, the climate swung back and forth in unpredictable ways, sometimes warming up quickly, and at other times snapping back into brief but intense cold spells. So, how exactly did this shifting climate harm animals? One of the main ways was through its effects on their homes and their food. As the planet warmed, the massive ice sheets that had once covered large parts of North America and Eurasia began to melt quickly. This caused sea levels all over the world to rise dramatically. When the sea rose, it flooded vast stretches of land that had once been dry, such as coastal plains and land bridges. One of the most important of these lost land connections was Beringia, a huge icy land bridge that had once joined Asia and North America. When this land bridge disappeared under rising seas, it not only shrank the total amount of land available for animals to live on, but also broke apart the continuous habitats that allowed animals to move freely. Populations became trapped and cut off from each other. For animals that depended on life along the coasts, the rising waters might have directly destroyed their living spaces. The melting ice also completely changed the landscape on land. During the Ice Age, much of the northern parts of the world were covered in a cold, dry ecosystem called the Mammoth Steppe, or Tundra Steppe. This open, grassy land was home to large herds of grazing animals like the woolly mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros. But as the climate warmed and the patterns of rain and snow changed, trees began to spread into these once open grasslands. This process is known as forest encroachment. As forests took over, the grassy plains shrank. This was bad news for animals that needed open spaces filled with tough grasses and sedges to survive. Mammoths and woolly rhinos, for example, were built to feed on these specific plants. When those plants became harder to find, so did their chances of survival. Forests also support very different kinds of plants and animals. While forests have their own kind of life, they offer food like leaves, twigs and bark, not the kind of meals giant grass eaters were used to. Also, forests can be harder to move through, making it more difficult for these large animals to travel and find food. Rainfall and snow patterns also changed in different ways across the world. Some areas became wetter, leading to the spread of forests, while other places became drier, with less rain or snow falling throughout the year. These changes could have caused droughts, dried up water sources, or confused the timing of when plants grew and bloomed. For big animals that needed a lot of water and whose food depended on the seasons, these changes could be devastating. In the far north, the melting of frozen ground, called permafrost, led to the creation of bogs and wetlands. While some animals, like mastodons, actually liked wet, marshy environments, others did not. As more and more dry land turned into soggy, muddy terrain, it became harder for many animals to find solid ground to walk on or graze in. For some, this made travel difficult, and for others, it reduced the land they could safely call home. Another problem was the warming temperatures themselves. Many of the Ice Age giants, such as woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses, were built for life in the cold. They had thick fur, layers of fat to keep them warm, and body shapes that helped them stay cozy in freezing weather. But as the world warmed up, these same features may have become a burden. During hotter summers, these animals might have suffered from overheating. Even if they shed some fur, their bodies may not have been able to cool down fast enough. This stress could have made them weaker, more vulnerable to diseases, and less successful at reproducing, all of which would have made it harder for their populations to survive. On top of all this, the shifting climate may have shaken up the entire food chain. When certain plants disappeared or changed, the animals that depended on them for food started to struggle. When those herbivores declined, predators that hunted them would have suffered too. Changes in snowfall also mattered. Some animals used their tusks or horns to dig through snow to find food. If the snow was too deep or had turned to ice, their usual food could become unreachable. On the other hand, if snow was too light or melted too early, it might not have protected the ground or stored enough water for plants to grow in spring. Perhaps the most difficult part for these animals was the speed at which all these changes happened. The end of the Ice Age was not a smooth, slow warm-up. It was filled with quick swings between hot and cold. One particularly sharp cold spell, known as the Younger Dryas, hit around 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. These sudden reversals would have been incredibly difficult for large animals to handle. Big creatures usually have long lifespans and take many years to reproduce. That means they adapt very slowly. They simply didn't have enough time to evolve new traits or to move to safer places before conditions changed again. As rising seas and changing landscapes broke up once continuous habitats, many animal populations became isolated in smaller areas. These smaller groups were more fragile. They had less genetic variety, which made them more vulnerable to disease, birth defects, and bad luck. If a tough winter, a disease outbreak, or a lack of food hit one group, it might be wiped out completely. And if nearby groups were cut off by rivers, forests, or ocean water, there would be no way for animals to move in and repopulate the area. This loss of connection between groups made survival even harder, and may have played a major role in the extinction of many of the Earth's once mighty giants. Around 18,000 years ago, Earth began to warm up. This marked the slow but powerful shift from the freezing cold world of the last Ice Age, the Pleistocene epoch, to the warmer and more stable climate of today's Holocene epoch. Temperatures did not rise all at once. Instead, they increased gradually over thousands of years. Although there were occasional bursts of faster change, the overall trend was a steady, creeping warmth that spread across the planet like a slow-moving tide. This quiet but relentless transformation would deeply affect the world's ecosystems, especially the mighty animals that had once ruled the Ice Age. Unlike sudden disasters such as massive volcanic eruptions or asteroid strikes, this warming was a silent force. It didn't shock the system all at once, but instead steadily eroded the conditions that had allowed giant animals, or megafauna, to flourish for hundreds of thousands of years. Over time, it changed the land, the plants, the water, and even the timing of the seasons. One of the most dramatic changes was the slow disappearance of a unique and vital landscape called the Mammoth Steppe, or Tundra Steppe. This enormous cold and dry grassland once stretched across much of northern Eurasia and North America. It was rich in grasses, sedges, and flowering plants, ideal food for giant plant eaters like the woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and steppe bison. These animals depended on the wide open plains and their abundant forage to feed their massive bodies. But as the earth warmed, this grassland began to shrink. Forests started spreading into areas that had once been open plains. Near the edges of the retreating glaciers, where the air was getting milder, thick boreal forests, filled with spruce, fir, and other evergreen trees, began to grow. In warmer regions, broad-leaved trees like oaks, maples, and birches took root, forming temperate deciduous forests. These woodlands replaced the grasslands slowly but steadily, one patch at a time. This shift in vegetation was a serious problem for the megafauna. Woolly mammoths, for instance, had large, high-crowned teeth made for grinding coarse, dry grasses, not leaves or twigs. While they may have tried to adapt by nibbling on shrubs or tree bark, it wasn't enough. Their huge bodies needed a constant supply of high-quality grass, and that was becoming harder and harder to find. This lack of food likely led to malnutrition, poor health, lower birth rates, and a greater vulnerability to other environmental pressures. Another key issue was the loss of cold habitats. Many Ice Age giants were built for the chill. Woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses had thick coats, dense underfur, thick layers of fat, and short ears and tails to conserve body heat. These features made them champions of the frozen world, but as temperatures slowly climbed, those same traits turned into a liability. Shedding some fur might help, but their bodies were still designed to stay warm, not cool off. During hotter summers, these animals may have suffered from overheating, needing more water, becoming sluggish while foraging, and falling victim to parasites or diseases they previously avoided. The ground itself was changing too. Permafrost, soil that had been frozen solid for thousands of years, began to thaw. This made once stable areas soggy, muddy, and hard to walk through, especially for heavy animals. It also released methane and carbon dioxide trapped in the soil, adding more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere and speeding up the warming in a feedback loop. Water systems were also affected. As the giant ice sheets melted, they raised sea levels, but inland areas experienced mixed effects. Some places got wetter, forming lakes and marshes, while others became drier as rain patterns changed. Rivers sometimes shifted their paths, and seasonal water sources could become unreliable. For megafauna that needed large amounts of water every day, these subtle changes could be disastrous. They might have had to travel farther for water, using more energy, and putting themselves at greater risk of predators. Over time, all these gradual changes, warming temperatures, shrinking grasslands, shifting forests, soggy ground, and drying rivers, added up. They didn't happen overnight, but their long-term effects were devastating. Because they happened slowly, they may not have been obvious at first. But for animals with long lifespans and slow reproduction, like mammoths, these changes came too fast to adapt to. Unlike small animals that reproduce quickly and can evolve faster, large Ice Age mammals were stuck in bodies and behaviours built for a world that was vanishing. The slow warming also broke up habitats. Patches of cold, open grassland became fewer and farther apart. This meant that megafauna populations became isolated from each other, unable to mix and mate as they once did. Without gene flow between herds, genetic diversity declined. Small, isolated groups are always more vulnerable. A bad winter or a dry year could wipe them out, and there would be no nearby animals to help repopulate the area. Subtle changes in seasons may have also created what scientists call phenological mismatches. For example, if plants started growing and flowering earlier in spring because of warmer temperatures, but the animal's breeding season stayed the same, then baby mammoths might be born when food was already past its peak. Even a small mismatch like this, repeated over many generations, could lower survival rates and gradually shrink populations. Predator-prey relationships were also affected. As the giant herbivores declined, their predators, like the European cave lion or the dire wolf, had less to eat. Even though these predators were adaptable, their fate was tied to the large prey they hunted. If mammoths or bison became rare, the predators would also struggle and eventually disappear. The land itself could no longer support the enormous numbers of animals that had once roamed freely across continents. Changing climate likely altered the spread and strength of diseases. Warmer and wetter conditions could have helped parasites or disease-carrying insects thrive in new places. Diseases that were once rare could have become more common, slowly weakening megafauna herds and making them more vulnerable to everything else. All these effects, nutritional stress, habitat loss, overheating, water shortages, disease and isolation, combined over thousands of years like pieces of a puzzle, each one adding to the pressure. The megafauna were being pushed bit by bit toward a tipping point. Even before humans entered the scene in significant numbers or dramatic climate spikes occurred, these slow and steady forces were already setting the stage for extinction. At the end of the last ice age, Earth did not gently ease into a warmer climate. Although the overall trend was one of slow warming, the path there was anything but smooth. Instead, the planet went through a series of wild and sudden climate swings. Sharp, warming episodes followed closely by just as quick freezes. Some of these changes happened in just a few decades or centuries, which is incredibly fast when you think in terms of Earth's long history. These sudden and dramatic shifts in temperature were like environmental shocks, and they were especially tough on large animals known as megafauna, like mammoths, giant ground sloths, and woolly rhinos. Unlike smaller animals that can adapt quickly or move to new areas, these giants were slower and more specialized. They had very specific needs and could not handle such fast changes. These rapid shifts may have been even more deadly to them than the steady warming itself. One of the most famous and well-studied examples of these sudden climate changes is something called the Younger Dryas event. This happened roughly between 12,900 and 11,700 years ago and lasted for about 1,200 years. Before the Younger Dryas, Earth was warming up during a period known as the Bölling-Allerud Interstadial, which began around 14,700 years ago. During that warmer phase, ice sheets were melting fast, forests were spreading, and life was returning to many areas. But then, almost without warning, the climate snapped back to cold conditions. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped sharply. Glaciers that had been retreating began to grow again, and green landscapes were quickly replaced by tundra and frozen plains. This sudden cold period was a major shock to ecosystems that had just started to recover. What caused this abrupt freeze? Most scientists believe that it was due to a massive flood of fresh water into the North Atlantic Ocean. This likely came from melting ice sheets forming huge glacial lakes, such as Lake Agassiz in North America. When one of these lakes suddenly drained, it sent a huge amount of fresh water into the ocean, disrupting a major ocean current system called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. This current usually carries warm water from the tropics up toward the north, helping to keep the northern hemisphere warm. When this ocean conveyor belt was interrupted, it sent much of the northern hemisphere back into an ice age-like chill. What made these changes so destructive was the speed at which they happened. Most ecosystems are slow to adjust to new conditions, especially those that support big, long-living animals. Evolution works over thousands or even millions of years, not within a few human lifetimes. Even behavioral changes like shifting migration routes or changing diets can take time, especially for species that follow fixed patterns passed down from generation to generation. Imagine a mammoth living during the warming period of the Bölling-Allerud. Suddenly temperatures crash, snow returns and food disappears. Plants that had started to thrive in warmer weather are wiped out. Grazers like mammoths and woolly rhinos, which relied on those plants, would have found themselves with nothing to eat. Even if they moved, the icy ground might have hidden the remaining vegetation beneath thick layers of snow and ice. These sudden changes didn't just shrink habitats slowly, they smashed them apart. Forests could vanish in just a few decades, replaced by cold steppe or tundra. Animals that lived in forests had nowhere to go, while grassland creatures suddenly found their food buried under snow. Populations became isolated, cut off from one another, making it harder to survive or reproduce. If one group of animals died out, there were no nearby herds to fill the gap. This isolation made extinction much more likely. The physical toll on animals was also intense. For example, during the initial warm-up, cold-loving animals like mammoths may have struggled with heat stress. Then came the Younger Dryas freeze, and their already depleted fat reserves might not have been enough to help them survive another deep freeze. When food became scarce and conditions got harsher, animals became weaker, sicker, and more vulnerable to predators. With long pregnancies and slow-growing young, even one bad year could be a disaster for their numbers, and recovery could take generations. And it wasn't just temperature swings. These rapid changes brought extreme weather too. Blizzards, droughts, floods. All of these could happen more often and hit harder during unstable periods like the Younger Dryas. Sudden snowstorms could trap entire herds. A thaw followed by a quick freeze might create an ice layer too thick for grazers to break through. Droughts could dry up water sources, and floods could wipe out food-growing areas. All these added pressures made survival even harder. What truly matters here is not just the average temperature, but the variability, the unpredictability of it all. Big animals had evolved during times when the climate was relatively steady, either cold, during full ice age conditions, or warmer, in interglacial periods like today. They were well suited to those stable patterns. But when the climate started jumping wildly from one extreme to another, their finely tuned life cycles, like breeding times, migrations, and foraging behaviours, were thrown completely out of sync. We know all this thanks to detailed evidence from the past. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, mud samples from the bottom of oceans and lakes, and other natural records show clear and sudden jumps in temperature, changes in ocean currents, and shifts in atmospheric gases. These records confirm that the end of the Ice Age was not a peaceful thaw, but a chaotic time of climate upheaval. In particular, the Younger Dryas lines up almost exactly with the time many megafauna disappeared in places like North America. While scientists still debate the exact causes, most agree that these quick and violent climate changes played a major role. In the end, it wasn't just how much the Earth warmed or cooled, but how fast it did, that proved fatal for many of the planet's largest and most majestic creatures. As the last Ice Age slowly came to an end, starting more than 18,000 years ago, and continuing over thousands of years, Earth's climate began to warm. This gradual rise in temperature caused the massive ice sheets that had once covered huge parts of the planet to melt at an increasing pace. While this warming might sound like good news at first, it brought dramatic and devastating changes to the natural world, especially for the megafauna, the giant animals that had roamed the Ice Age landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. These mighty creatures, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, and many more, were perfectly adapted to live in cold, open environments. They had evolved to thrive in chilly temperatures, eating tough grasses and moving across vast plains. But as the planet warmed, their world began to disappear right beneath their feet. The places they once called home, where they found food, shelter, and safe places to raise their young, were changing fast and in ways they could not keep up with. One of the biggest changes was the disappearance of the mammoth steppe, also known as the tundra steppe. This was a huge and highly productive grassland ecosystem that had once stretched from the cold plains of northern Europe and Asia all the way across to North America. During the coldest part of the Ice Age, known as the last glacial maximum, around 26,000 years ago, this steppe covered an immense area and was rich in grasses, sedges, and flowering plants. It was like a giant banquet table laid out for the megafauna, offering high-quality forage in endless supply. But as Earth's climate began to shift, the balance tilted. Temperatures rose, moisture levels increased, and the dry, cold grasslands began to give way to forests. In northern areas, especially near the melting edges of the giant ice sheets, boreal forests began to spread. These forests were filled with coniferous trees like spruces and firs. Further south, temperate deciduous forests grew larger, with trees that dropped their broad leaves in winter. This process, known as forest encroachment, meant that open grasslands were gradually swallowed up by thick woods. This was a serious problem for animals like mammoths. Their teeth were specially shaped for grinding down coarse, gritty grass, not for nibbling leaves in a shady forest. Their huge bodies needed massive amounts of food each day, food that could only be found in open plains. Forests, on the other hand, had less grass, different kinds of plants, and tight spaces that were hard for large herds to move through. The megafauna faced a shrinking food supply, and more difficulty finding what they needed to survive. And it wasn't just forests that replaced the grasslands. In many areas, as the frozen ground, called permafrost, began to thaw, large amounts of water pooled up on the surface. This created wetlands, bogs, and swamps, habitats that were completely different from the dry steppes. Some animals, like the mastodon, could live in wetter environments, but others like mammoths and woolly rhinos had a much harder time. These enormous animals could get stuck in muddy ground or use up too much energy trying to move through it. Wetlands also supported different plants, which meant yet another change in diet, and not a welcome one. At the same time, some places actually became drier instead of wetter. Rainfall patterns shifted, and in some regions the land turned into dry grasslands or even deserts. This created a patchy and unpredictable landscape. In some places there wasn't enough grass or water to support large animals. In others, new plants grew that the megafauna had never eaten before. The world was turning into a confusing puzzle of forests, wetlands, dry plains, and deserts, and most of these new environments were far less suitable for the big Ice Age animals. Another major problem was that the warming world disrupted the migration routes that many animals had used for thousands of years. Mammoths, bison, and other grazers used to travel long distances each season to find fresh grass and water. But now, their paths were blocked by newly formed lakes, swollen rivers full of meltwater, or thick forests. In some places, Enormous lakes had formed near the edges of the retreating glaciers. These preglacial lakes were like giant walls of water, stopping animals from reaching their traditional feeding grounds. When animals couldn't move freely, they ended up crowded into smaller and smaller areas. This created more competition for less food, which led to more stress and more risk of starvation. Some animals may have even tried to cross rivers or wetlands and drowned or got trapped. Migration, once a reliable survival strategy, had turned into a dangerous gamble. This shrinking and breaking apart of suitable habitat is called habitat fragmentation, and it had deadly consequences. As the best grasslands disappeared, only small patches remained. These were often isolated from one another, like islands in a sea of unsuitable environments. Fewer animals could live in these small areas, and those that did were cut off from others of their kind. This isolation caused several serious problems. First, it reduced the population size, so there were simply fewer individuals left. Second, it cut off gene flow between groups. This led to inbreeding, which weakened the animals over time by lowering their ability to resist disease, survive harsh winters, or adapt to new threats. Third, small isolated groups were at risk of being wiped out by bad luck. A severe snowstorm, an outbreak of illness, or even a few humans with hunting weapons could wipe out a whole local population. And with no nearby animals to take their place, that group would be gone for good. The physical features that had helped the megafauna thrive in cold climates also became a problem. Animals like woolly mammoths and rhinos had thick layers of fur and fat to keep them warm. They had short legs and stocky bodies to hold in heat. But as summers grew hotter, these adaptations became dangerous. Many of these animals likely suffered from heat stress, which could weaken them, make them more vulnerable to disease, reduce their ability to find food, and lower their chances of having healthy young. On top of that, the change in plant life meant a change in the nutritional value of their diet. The mammoth steppe had provided not only plenty of food, but also the right kind of food, grasses that were rich in the nutrients needed to sustain huge bodies. Forest plants and wetland vegetation were often lower in the nutrients these animals needed most. So even if some food was still available, it might not have been good enough to keep them healthy and strong. All these changes, the warming climate, the melting ice, the shifting landscapes, the changing plant life, and the blocked migration paths, worked together to make life harder and harder for the megafauna. It wasn't just one thing that caused their decline, it was a whole chain of challenges piling up over time. In the end, many of these magnificent creatures, once rulers of the Ice Age world, could not survive the new conditions of the Holocene, the warmer, wetter, and forest-covered world that followed. During the Ice Age, Earth's giant ice sheets weren't just frozen walls standing still for thousands of years. These massive sheets of ice were actually quite active, growing bigger or shrinking depending on how Earth's climate was changing. Around 18,000 years ago, and especially starting about 15,000 years ago, these enormous glaciers began to melt at a speed never seen before. This melting process, known as deglaciation, was triggered by a steady rise in global temperatures. But it didn't just change the landscape, it completely reshaped Earth's environment and deeply affected the survival of the large animals, known as megafauna, that had lived and thrived during the Ice Age. As the ice melted, an unimaginable amount of water poured back into Earth's oceans. This caused the sea levels to rise drastically, changing coastlines and covering land that had been dry for tens of thousands of years. During the coldest part of the last glacial period, called the last glacial maximum, so much of Earth's water was frozen in ice that sea levels were around 120 meters lower than they are today. That's about 400 feet. When the glaciers melted, all that water didn't just vanish. It flowed into the oceans over thousands of years, slowly but steadily raising the sea level. This rise had a powerful ripple effect. Large areas of land along the coasts were swallowed up by the sea. These areas, called continental shelves, had once been dry ground teeming with life, home to rich plant and animal communities. As the ocean covered them, many species lost their habitats and food sources. Even more importantly, the rising waters drowned the land bridges that had once connected continents and islands. These land bridges were natural highways for both animals and early humans. The most famous one was called Beringia, a huge strip of land that once linked Siberia in Asia with Alaska in North America. Woolly mammoths, bison, and even early human groups used bring gear to cross between the continents. But around 11,000 years ago, the sea swallowed Beringia, cutting off that crucial migration path. Other land bridges also disappeared, like those connecting Southeast Asia to Indonesia, known as Sunderland, and Australia to New Guinea, Sahul. When these connections vanished beneath the waves, animals living on different sides became isolated. This isolation made them more vulnerable to environmental changes, diseases, and possibly human hunters. The melting ice didn't just change the shape of the land and the sea, it also had dramatic effects on the oceans themselves. One of the biggest impacts was on a major system of ocean currents known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC for short. Think of AMOC as a massive underwater conveyor belt. It carries warm, salty water from the tropics up into the North Atlantic, where it cools, sinks, and then flows back toward the south. This movement helps spread heat around the planet, keeping some places warmer than they would be otherwise. But when huge amounts of cold, fresh water from the melting glaciers poured into the North Atlantic, the balance was thrown off. Fresh water is less salty and less dense, which made it harder for the ocean water to sink and keep the conveyor belt moving. If the AMOC slowed down, or even paused, it could have caused sudden changes in climate. In fact, one famous cold snap called the Younger Dryas happened about 12,800 years ago and is believed to have been triggered by just such a flood of meltwater. During this time, temperatures in the northern hemisphere suddenly dropped, bringing back icy conditions even after things had started warming up. This shows just how powerful and far-reaching the effects of melting ice can be. The melting ice sheets also affected Earth's atmosphere and weather. These huge ice masses influenced air pressure and storm systems. As they shrank, the pressure systems shifted, and with them came changes in wind patterns, rainfall, and temperature. Some areas that had once been dry and cool became wetter and warmer, while others grew drier and hotter. Storm tracks, the paths that storms follow, also moved, which meant some places got more rain and others faced longer droughts. These shifting weather patterns made it much harder for plants and animals to survive, especially those that depended on specific climates and food sources. Another big change came from the formation of proglacial lakes, gigantic lakes of meltwater that pooled along the edges of the retreating ice. One of the most famous of these was Lake Agassiz in North America. At its largest, it was even bigger than all of today's Great Lakes put together. These lakes dramatically altered the land, creating new water habitats but also flooding huge areas, and when they suddenly burst and drained, they could cause catastrophic floods and even global climate events like the Younger Dryas. Meltwater also carved out new rivers and changed how water flowed across entire continents. Some areas experienced more frequent and intense flooding, while others dried up as the source of water disappeared with the ice. Even the ground beneath our feet felt the impact of deglaciation. Ice sheets are incredibly heavy, and they had been pressing down on Earth's crust for tens of thousands of years. When they melted, that weight was lifted, and the land began to rise again in a process called isostatic rebound. This slow lifting changed the shape of coastlines and river systems. The retreating glaciers also left behind piles of rock, soil, and debris, creating new landforms like moraines, drumlins, and outwash plains. At first, these newly exposed areas were barren and unstable. Over time, they were colonized by hardy pioneer plants, and eventually new ecosystems developed, but not fast enough to help many of the struggling megafauna. All these changes, the rising seas, shifting climates, altered landscapes, and disappearing migration routes, created an Earth that was completely different from the one Ice Age animals had evolved to survive in. Species like woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and others had adapted to cold climates, stable ecosystems, and predictable food supplies. But now, their habitats were vanishing, their food sources were changing or disappearing, and their ability to migrate was cut off by new lakes, rivers, and oceans. These animals had survived many challenges over hundreds of thousands of years, but the speed and scale of the changes brought by the melting ice was simply too much. The world was transforming faster than they could adapt. All these overlapping stresses, rising temperatures, flooded landscapes, new climates, and isolation, added up to a crushing burden. For many of Earth's great Ice Age creatures, it was the beginning of the end. This massive wave of extinctions, often called the Great Vanishing, marked the close of one of the most dramatic chapters in Earth's natural history. To truly understand why so many giant animals, known as megafauna, disappeared near the end of the Ice Age, we must look closely at one very important piece of the puzzle: the movements of early modern humans, or Homo sapiens, across the globe. These humans first evolved in Africa, where they lived alongside large animals for hundreds of thousands of years. But when humans began spreading out to other continents, especially Australia, North America, and South America, something strange happened. The giant animals in those places started to vanish soon after. This close timing forms the heart of what scientists call the human impact theory of the Great Extinction event that marked the end of the Ice Age. According to the widely accepted out-of-Africa model, modern humans began leaving Africa in large numbers around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. They first moved into Asia, then Europe, and much later into the Americas and Australia. The exact timing of when people reached each continent is crucial to the story. One of the earliest places humans reached outside Africa and Eurasia was Australia, along with nearby New Guinea. Back then, when sea levels were lower, these two land masses were joined together in a supercontinent called Sahul. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans arrived in Sahul about 50,000 to 65,000 years ago. This was long before the coldest part of the last Ice Age, meaning the climate was still fairly stable, though it did have some ups and downs. At that time, Australia was home to an amazing variety of giant animals found nowhere else on Earth. There was the Diprotodon, a giant wombat-like marsupial that could weigh up to 3 metric tons. There were also giant kangaroos, the fierce marsupial lion, known as Thylacoleo carnifex, and the massive flightless bird Genyornis, which stood taller than a human. However, most of these remarkable creatures vanished between 45,000 and 40,000 years ago, almost immediately after humans arrived. Since this happened before the dramatic climate changes at the very end of the Ice Age, it strongly suggests that humans played a direct role in the extinction of these animals. The creatures, having never encountered a smart, organised and tool-using predator like humans before, were likely caught off guard. In the Americas, humans arrived much later. The leading theory says that people came from Northeast Asia into North America by walking across a land bridge called Beringia, which once connected Siberia and Alaska when sea levels were much lower. This happened during the last glacial maximum, the coldest part of the Ice Age. Although the exact date is still being debated, there is strong evidence of the first widespread human culture in North America, called the Clovis culture, appearing around 13,400 to 13,200 years ago. These Clovis people were expert hunters who used finely crafted stone tools, especially their famous fluted spear points. Strikingly, their arrival lines up almost perfectly with the sudden extinction of many large animals in North America. These included the woolly mammoth, the mastodon, the deadly saber-toothed cat, the fierce dire wolf, the towering giant ground sloth, and the powerful short-faced bear. Most of these creatures vanished between 13,000 and 11,500 years ago. The overlap in timing is so precise that many scientists believe the Clovis hunters may have played a major role in wiping out North America's megafauna. From North America, humans quickly spread into South America. Archaeological evidence shows that people had reached the southernmost tip of the continent by around 12,500 years ago, just a few thousand years after arriving in the north. South America had its own amazing collection of giant creatures, like the enormous Megatherium, a ground sloth as big as a small elephant, the Glyptodon, a massive armadillo-like creature, and many large hoofed animals. Just like in North America, the arrival of humans was soon followed by a wave of extinctions. Most of South America's megafauna disappeared between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago. Once again, the timing of human arrival and the loss of the big animals is too close to ignore. In Eurasia, the story is more complicated. Humans, including not just Homo sapiens but also Neanderthals, had been living alongside large Ice Age animals for hundreds of thousands of years. These included the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, and the majestic European cave lion. People hunted these animals for a very long time, across both warm and cold periods. Despite this, many of these animals managed to survive until around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, when the climate suddenly warmed and human populations grew larger and more organised. This suggests that although humans were present for a long time, it was the combination of a changing environment and increasing human pressure that finally drove many of these animals to extinction. Interestingly, not all mammoths disappeared right away. A small group of woolly mammoths survived on Wrangel Island, far to the north in the Arctic Ocean, until only about 4,000 years ago. That is thousands of years after their relatives had vanished from the mainland. Since few or no humans lived on Wrangel Island during that time, their survival there supports the idea that human presence was a key factor in the mainland extinctions. All across the world, a clear pattern emerges. In places like Australia, North America and South America, where giant animals had never evolved alongside humans, they disappeared soon after humans arrived. These animals had no way of knowing how dangerous humans could be. They had no built-in fear, no strategies to avoid being hunted by such clever predators. This lack of experience, what scientists call prey naivete, likely made them especially easy targets. And while climate change was happening everywhere, the timing of the extinctions was different in each region, often matching human arrival more closely than any global climate shift. That strong geographic and temporal pattern gives powerful support to the theory that humans were a driving force behind one of the most dramatic extinction events in Earth's history. The bond between humans and fire stretches back deep into prehistory, far beyond just lighting a campfire to stay warm or cooking food. For tens of thousands of years, and maybe even much longer, early humans didn't just use fire passively. They used it actively, as a powerful tool to change the world around them. People learned to control fire and used it to shape the land, manage plant life, and even influence the movements of animals. This practice, often called fire stick farming, or sometimes pyrotechnology, had enormous and long-lasting effects on the environment. In particular, it had major consequences for the huge animals of the Ice Age, creatures known as megafauna. While fire could help people find more food and make their lives easier, it also led to serious changes in the landscape. These changes often harmed the habitats of Ice Age animals, especially by altering the types of plants available for them to eat. One of the main ways humans used fire was through controlled burns. This meant they would deliberately start small, low-intensity fires, not to cause destruction, but to achieve specific goals. For example, in thick forests or places with lots of dry, flammable material, massive wildfires could break out naturally and burn everything in their path. By setting smaller, controlled fires at regular intervals, early humans could prevent these devastating blazes. But beyond safety, controlled fires were also used to open up landscapes. When fire passed through a forest, it often killed the trees but allowed grasses and other sun-loving plants to grow in the cleared areas. If the area was burned again and again, it would stop young trees from growing back. Over time, thick forests were turned into open woodlands or even wide grasslands, ideal for grazing animals. But fire wasn't just for managing plants, it was also a clever hunting tool. Hunters learned to use fire to drive animals out of hiding, or to steer them toward traps. For example, a group of hunters might light a fire on one side of a forest to scare a herd of mammoths or bison into running toward a cliff or an ambush. The smoke and flames would cause panic, and the animals would flee in a predictable direction, right where the hunters were waiting. This strategy made it easier and safer to hunt enormous, dangerous creatures and allowed communities to get more meat, skins, and bones with less risk. Over time, the regular use of fire had a huge impact on the ecosystems these Ice Age animals depended on. Fire changed which plants could grow. Species that were used to fire, like certain grasses and fast-growing trees, did well. But slow-growing plants, or those with thin bark that couldn't survive fire, began to disappear. These changes meant that entire plant communities shifted across wide areas. In places where fire created new grasslands, some grazing animals thrived. But animals that needed specific types of forests or shrubs to feed on, like mastodons or giant ground sloths, began to struggle. Even if new plants grew in the burned areas, they might not be the right kinds for these animals to eat. Over time, this could lead to hunger and poor health among these specialized feeders. Fire also affected the soil. A quick, gentle fire could actually help by releasing nutrients into the soil, making it fertile for a short time. But when fires were too intense or happened too often, they could burn away the organic matter and wash away important minerals. This would slowly make the land less fertile, which meant fewer plants could grow and fewer animals could live there. On hillsides or in areas with heavy rain, burned ground was more likely to suffer from erosion, where soil is washed away by wind or water, further damaging habitats. Another important effect of repeated burning was the creation of mosaic landscapes. This means the land became a patchwork of different zones, some recently burned and full of young plants, some in recovery, and others untouched. In some cases, this increased the variety of habitats, which could be helpful for certain animals. But for others, especially large megafauna that needed wide, continuous habitats, it was a problem. Their living space became broken up and scattered. This made it harder for them to find enough food, find mates, or avoid predators. Fires also stopped forest from maturing. In areas where humans burned regularly, forests never had the chance to grow tall and thick again. Instead, the land was kept in a more open, grassy stage of growth, something that might not have happened without human involvement. The effect of all this burning, stretched over thousands of years, was a complete reshaping of entire continents. Scientists have found many clues that show just how far back this human fire use goes. There are layers of ancient charcoal buried in the ground, signs of old fires in archaeological digs, and even pollen samples that show how plant life changed in patterns matching human-set fires. One striking example comes from Australia, where indigenous people have lived for over 40,000 years. There, the long-term use of fire helped maintain the grasslands and eucalyptus forests that cover much of the land today. But these open environments may have played a part in the disappearance of fire-sensitive animals, megafauna that preferred thicker forests and cooler shade. In North America, the timing of Ice Age animal extinctions lines up closely with a rise in ancient charcoal deposits, suggesting that humans were using fire more and more during this period. As humans moved across the landscape, burning as they went, they may not have meant to harm these large creatures, but the indirect effects were still powerful. For megafauna that depended on dense forests or leafy shrubs for food, shelter, or safe places to raise their young, the constant fires were a disaster. Their homes were burned, their food sources changed, and their ability to survive was challenged. Some animals, like bison, may have benefited from the newly opened grasslands, but others could not adapt as easily, and they began to vanish. The way early humans used fire shaped the very world they lived in. Even if extinction was not their goal, the changes they made to the land, clearing forests, altering plant life, breaking up habitats, put enormous pressure on the great beasts of the Ice Age. Fire in human hands became one of the most powerful tools for changing nature, and its legacy can still be seen in landscapes around the world today. When we think about the ways early humans affected the giant animals of the Ice Age, creatures like mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths, we often picture direct hunting or the use of fire to shape the land. But those are only part of the story. In many cases, early humans didn't even have to lift a spear to influence the fate of these animals. Just by living, moving, and surviving, they caused many smaller, less obvious changes that may have added up to something much bigger. These quiet and sometimes accidental effects likely played a major role in the slow downfall and eventual disappearance of many Ice Age megafauna. Unlike a spear point stuck in a bone, these hidden influences are harder for scientists to detect in the fossil and archaeological records. But when you add them together and combine them with things like changing climate, they could have pushed many species to a dangerous edge, a tipping point beyond which survival was no longer possible. One of the biggest of these indirect effects was competition for essential resources. As human groups grew larger and spread across more regions, they began to compete with megafauna for things like fresh water, shelter, and certain types of plants. Imagine a small group of humans settling near a watering hole. They didn't need as much water as a thirsty herd of mammoths, but their constant presence could have scared the animals away. And during dry seasons, when water was already scarce, being forced to travel longer distances to find new sources could have left the animals weak, dehydrated, or vulnerable to predators. Humans also used caves and rock shelters as homes or temporary resting places. These same places were often used by large animals, such as cave bears, to sleep, raise young, or survive cold winters. But when humans moved in, their noise, smells and activities likely frightened animals away from these safe spots. For hibernating bears, losing access to a quiet and safe place to sleep could be life-threatening. Exposure to cold weather, predators, or constant stress would have made survival through winter much harder. Then there's food. Early humans gathered many of the same high-energy plant foods that megafauna needed, things like fruits, nuts, roots, and tubers. Even though humans ate far less than a giant sloth, their focused and repeated harvesting of the best foods, especially during lean seasons, may have caused local shortages. In places where plant variety was limited, this could have made a big difference. Another subtle but powerful way humans changed the environment was by disrupting food chains. Humans were skilled and adaptable hunters. When they entered new lands, they often targeted specific animals for food. If those prey animals were also important for native predators, like the dire wolf, then humans were unintentionally stealing meals from the mouths of other hunters. Over time, this could lead to a drop in predator numbers due to hunger and starvation. Ironically, if those predators started disappearing, their prey might have multiplied at first. But soon, the large numbers of grazing animals could have eaten too much vegetation, damaging the environment and creating new problems for everyone. This domino effect, where one change causes many others, is known as a trophic cascade, and it could have thrown entire ecosystems off balance. For example, if humans hunted too many large herbivores, predators like the saber-toothed cat would have struggled to find enough food, even if humans never hunted them directly. Possibly the most dangerous of all the indirect human impacts was disease. As humans spread across the world, from Africa into Europe, Asia, the Americas and Australia, they didn't travel alone. They carried with them bacteria, viruses and parasites, some of which lived in their own bodies, and others that came from their newly domesticated animals, especially dogs. The animals in places like North America or Australia had been isolated for tens of thousands of years. They had never been exposed to the kinds of germs humans or their dogs carried. That meant they had no natural defences. A virus that caused nothing more than a mild cough in a dog might have swept through a population of native canids, like the dire wolf, killing them in large numbers. This idea, sometimes called the hyperdisease hypothesis, suggests that waves of illness could have spread rapidly through vulnerable species, leading to sudden and large-scale extinctions. While it's very hard to find physical proof of ancient diseases, the speed and selectivity of some extinction events make this a real possibility. Humans also changed the land in other quiet ways. Even small campsites, where people built shelters, cleared space, and made fires, could have long-term effects. Trails made by repeated walking, small wells dug to access water, and piles of waste left behind may seem minor. But across hundreds or thousands of locations, over many generations, these actions could break up natural habitats into smaller pieces. This kind of habitat fragmentation makes it harder for large animals to find food, migrate, or find mates. Additionally, humans may have unintentionally brought in new plants that change the local environment, and just being around, making noise, moving about, lighting fires, could have stressed megafauna. Animals that once roamed peacefully through quiet meadows or rested in calm forests might have found those places full of danger and disturbance. If they had to avoid key areas because of human activity, they might have used up more energy, struggled to reproduce, and gradually declined over time. This kind of chronic stress doesn't kill right away, but it can wear down a species bit by bit. Dogs, the first domesticated animals, added even more pressure. These loyal companions followed humans into new territories and competed directly with wild carnivores for food. But more importantly, they could carry diseases to which native animals had no resistance. In this way, even friendly dogs, just by existing, may have helped spread illnesses that weakened or wiped out entire species. So while hunting and fire were powerful tools used by early humans, the quieter, unintended consequences of their presence may have been just as destructive. Bit by bit, through competition, disruption, disease and stress, early humans changed the rules of the game, and for many of the great beasts of the Ice Age, it was a game they could no longer win. The idea known as the Pleistocene Overkill Hypothesis, sometimes called the Blitzkrieg Hypothesis, suggests that one of the main reasons so many large Ice Age animals disappeared was because early modern humans hunted them too much. According to this theory, when Homo sapiens started spreading quickly into new parts of the world, especially places like North America, South America, and Australia, these large animals had never encountered such smart and well-organized hunters before. With no experience or natural defenses against humans, many species became easy prey. Over time, intense hunting by humans may have pushed them to extinction. At the heart of this theory is the idea that early human hunters, especially the Clovis people in North America and the first human settlers in Australia and South America, had a powerful mix of intelligence, teamwork, and deadly tools. These humans were not just chasing rabbits or scavenging leftovers. They were organized, strategic, and able to hunt the biggest, strongest, and most dangerous creatures on the planet. One of their most advanced tools was the Clovis point, a finely crafted stone spear tip that could be attached to wooden shafts. These points were razor sharp and could pierce through thick hides and bones. They also used Atlatls, or spear throwers, which let them throw their weapons faster, farther, and with much more force, making it possible to kill large animals from a safe distance. But it wasn't just their tools that made early humans successful. They also worked together in groups to ambush, trap, or surround large animals. One person alone couldn't take down a mammoth or a giant sloth, but a group of hunters, using clever strategies, could. These coordinated efforts made them even more effective and deadly as predators. Another key idea in the overkill theory is the concept of naivete, that the large animals in these new continents simply didn't know how to deal with humans. In Africa, where animals and human ancestors had lived side by side for hundreds of thousands of years, big animals like elephants or rhinos had learned to be cautious around people. But in places like Australia, North America, and South America, animals had evolved for millions of years without ever seeing a human. So when humans arrived, these animals didn't recognize them as a serious threat. They might have been more afraid of saber-toothed cats or dire wolves, but those predators used very different hunting methods. Because the animals didn't run away or hide effectively from humans, they were much easier to hunt and kill. These big animals, what scientists call megafauna, were also vulnerable for another reason. They reproduced very slowly. Many of them had long pregnancies, gave birth to just one baby at a time, and waited several years between births. They also needed many years to grow up and have babies of their own. This means that even if humans killed just a small number of them each year, say 2 or 3% of the population, it could still lead to extinction because the animals couldn't reproduce fast enough to replace those losses. Unlike rabbits or deer, who can have many babies quickly, megafauna couldn't bounce back from hunting pressure. The blitzkrieg part of the theory refers to the idea that humans moved quickly across continents, wiping out animals as they went. Imagine an invading army sweeping across a land, destroying everything in its path. That's how some scientists picture the spread of humans and the rapid disappearance of large animals. As humans entered a new area, they found plenty of big, unwary animals. After hunting them heavily and reducing their numbers, the humans would move on to a new region, repeating the cycle. This wave of hunting and extinction is believed to have taken place over just a few thousand years, which is very fast on a geological timescale. Archaeological discoveries support this theory in many ways. For example, scientists have found bones of mammoths and other large animals with clear-cut marks, signs that humans butchered them. In some cases, they've even found stone spear points stuck in the bones. Large animal remains have also been found near ancient human campsites. Even though we don't find this kind of direct evidence for every extinct species, the pattern is clear. In many parts of the world, the disappearance of megafauna happened shortly after humans arrived, not long after and not before. This timing is especially noticeable in places like North and South America and Australia, where humans were new predators. On the other hand, in Africa, where large animals and humans had lived together for a very long time, many megafauna species survived. This difference suggests that African animals had adapted to living alongside humans in a way that others hadn't. Some scientists argue against the overkill theory, saying that climate change, especially the warming at the end of the last ice age, was the main cause of the extinctions. While climate surely played a role, supporters of the overkill hypothesis point out that the timing of the extinctions often matches human arrival more closely than it does any major climate event. They also note that most of the animals that died out were the big ones, while smaller animals tended to survive. If climate change were the only cause, it should have affected animals of all sizes, not just the biggest ones. But if humans were the main drivers, it makes sense that they focused their hunting on large animals that provided the most meat, hides, bones, and other resources. Although the debate is ongoing, the Pleistocene overkill hypothesis remains a powerful explanation for why so many giants of the Ice Age vanished. It shows how much impact early humans could have on the natural world, even with stone tools and small groups of hunters. It reminds us that from the very beginning, human beings have had the power to change entire ecosystems, sometimes in ways that are irreversible. In the ancient world of the Ice Age, early humans were not just clever survivors, they were brilliant innovators. Their ability to travel through different kinds of landscapes and hunt animals, especially the enormous ones like mammoths and giant ground sloths, was not just about strength or bravery. It was about brains and tools. As time went on, humans developed smarter and more powerful hunting weapons, and this changed everything. What had once been a dangerous and risky task, hunting huge animals up close with heavy spears, soon became safer, faster, and far more effective. This leap in technology helped humans rise as top predators, changing the very way life worked between hunters and prey. One of the most game-changing inventions during this time was a simple-looking but powerful tool called the Atlatl, also known as the spear thrower. Along with this came beautifully crafted stone tips like the famous Clovis points. Together, these tools gave early humans an amazing advantage. They could now bring down large animals from a distance, avoiding the deadly risks of close combat. Before tools like the Atlatl existed, hunting large animals meant getting very close. Hunters had to face beasts like mastodons and woolly rhinos with only short hand-thrust spears. These close encounters were extremely dangerous. They demanded not only incredible physical strength and speed, but also great courage, and even then, many hunters were badly injured or killed. But that all began to change when humans invented true projectile weapons. The Atlatl was a simple but brilliant idea. It was a handheld device, usually made of wood or bone with a hook at one end. That hook connected to the back of a long, thin spear or dart. When a hunter swung the Atlatl, it acted like an extension of their arm, making the spear fly much faster and farther than if it were thrown by hand alone. This added distance meant that a hunter could stand 20 or even 30 meters away, more than 60 to 90 feet, and still strike a powerful blow. The extra speed gave the spear more force, allowing it to pierce the thick fur, hide, and muscle of giant animals. For the hunter, this meant more safety, better accuracy, and less effort. It became possible to kill from a distance to hit fleeing animals more reliably, and to save energy and lives in the process. But the spear was only one part of the equation. The other half was the sharp, carefully made stone tip attached to the end. Around 13,400 to 13,200 years ago, so over 13 millennia ago, early people living near what is now Clovis, New Mexico, created a special type of spear point known as the Clovis point. These points had a unique feature, a groove or flute carved into each side near the base. This design helped the stone tip stay firmly attached to the spear shaft, even during high-impact hits. Clovis points were made from the finest materials, flint, chert, or obsidian. They weren't just sharp, they were aerodynamic, balanced, and strong. Making one required serious skill and patience. The process of shaping the stone, called knapping, involved striking the rock in just the right way to chip off small flakes, forming a thin and deadly edge. Similar stone points appeared in other parts of the world too, like the Solitrian points in Europe, known for their elegant thinness, or the later Folsom points in North America, which were smaller but possibly better suited for hunting speedy animals like bison. With these tools, the Atlatl and the stone point, hunting became not only safer but also far more successful. A hunter could stand back and throw a spear with deadly power. If the throw was well aimed, It could punch deep into the animal's organs, causing rapid blood loss and a quick death. This meant fewer injuries for the hunters and less suffering for the animals. In addition, because the spear flew straighter and more accurately, it was easier to hit a vital spot like the heart or lungs, even on a moving target. But this leap in hunting ability wasn't just physical. It showed how smart early humans really were. They understood things like speed, force, distance, and materials, even if they didn't have modern words for it. They learned to find the best stones, to carry them long distances, and to shape them carefully. They made composite weapons too, combining stone tips with wooden shafts, or using foreshafts, which were short front pieces that could detach on impact. This allowed the main spear shaft to be reused and made the weapon more durable. These inventions didn't just help humans survive, they changed the balance of nature. On continents like North America and Australia, where large animals had never faced such smart and well-equipped predators, the result was devastating. These megafauna had evolved to protect themselves from close-range attackers like saber-toothed cats and dire wolves. They were not prepared for humans who could strike from far away. Since many of these animals had slow, reproductive rates and long pregnancies, even a small increase in how often they were killed could lead to their extinction. Evidence from archaeological sites supports this idea. In places where Clovis tools have been found, scientists also often find the remains of many large animals, clear signs of successful hunts. Humans weren't just surviving, they were dominating. By mastering long-range hunting, early humans became apex predators, creatures at the very top of the food chain. They didn't need to chase or wrestle with their prey anymore. Instead, they could work together, plan their attacks, and use their tools to deadly effect. Over time, this technology spread across the globe. Different cultures created their own versions of these tools, whether in Ice Age Europe or early North America, but the result was the same. Humans became the most dangerous and intelligent hunters the world had ever seen. The idea that new diseases, also called pathogens, might have played a major role in wiping out the giant animals of the Ice Age is both fascinating and difficult to prove. This theory suggests that as early human groups spread across different parts of the world, they unknowingly brought along unfamiliar diseases. These could have come directly from their own bodies, or from animals they had tamed, such as dogs. When these diseases reached wild animals that had never been exposed to them before, the results could have been disastrous. Without any natural resistance, entire species could have fallen sick and died very quickly, leading to mass extinction. At the heart of this idea is a concept scientists call immunological naivete. That simply means an animal has no past experience with a disease, so its immune system is completely unprepared. When a new virus, bacteria, or parasite shows up, it can spread like wildfire, causing illness and death on a massive scale. We've seen something similar in human history. When European explorers arrived in the Americas in the 1500s, they brought diseases like smallpox and measles. The indigenous peoples of the Americas had never faced those diseases before, and millions died as a result. The same kind of devastation could have happened to Ice Age animals when humans and their animal companions arrived in new places. The diseases carried by humans and their dogs could have been any kind of microbe. Fast-moving viruses, harmful bacteria, or exhausting parasites. A virus might sweep through a herd quickly, killing many in a short time. Bacteria could cause slow, painful infections, and parasites might weaken animals over time, leaving them too sick or tired to find food or reproduce. Some of these germs might have infected many different animals, while others might have been very specific. Perhaps a virus that only attacked large plant eaters, or a bacterium that spread easily among animals that lived in tight social groups. How these diseases spread also matters. For a disease to cause a mass extinction, it would need to spread easily and be very deadly. It could pass from animal to animal by touch, through shared food or water, or through insects like ticks. If the animals lived in large groups like herds, the disease could race through the population. But even animals that lived far apart wouldn't be safe if they gathered at the same watering holes, or if the disease was incredibly contagious. One powerful version of this theory is called the hyperdisease idea. This suggests that a new and especially deadly disease appeared, maybe a virus that had mutated or a brand new germ never seen before. and this disease struck hard and fast. Unlike normal diseases that usually kill only the weak or sick, a hypid disease could wipe out healthy animals too. This would explain why so many giant animals vanished so quickly. In some places, these extinctions happened in just a few thousand years, a blink of an eye in geological time. That speed fits with what we know about deadly outbreaks that outpace a population's ability to fight back. Proving this theory, however, is very difficult. Unlike bones or stone tools, microbes and soft tissues usually do not survive for tens of thousands of years. Scientists do try to study ancient DNA from preserved animal remains, but it is extremely hard to find and identify specific disease-causing microbes in such old material. Because of this, the evidence for the disease theory is mostly indirect. Scientists look at how quickly the animals disappeared, which kinds of animals vanished, mostly the big ones, and how closely their decline lines up with the arrival of humans and their animals in new regions. It is also important to remember that sick animals are often more vulnerable when they are already under stress. During the end of the Ice Age, the climate was changing dramatically. Habitats were shrinking, food became harder to find, and animals had to travel more or behave differently just to survive. These pressures may have weakened their immune systems, making them easy targets for diseases. On top of that, habitat loss and human activity might have split populations into smaller, more isolated groups. These small groups would have had less genetic variety, which made it harder for them to resist a new disease. This theory also shows how humans could have caused extinctions without even trying. If people or their animals were the ones bringing in new diseases, then even without directly hunting the megafauna or destroying their environments, humans could still have played a major role in their disappearance. For example, when humans crossed into North America from Siberia by way of the Bering Land Bridge, sometime around 15,000 years ago, they may have brought dogs with them. These dogs might have carried diseases that didn't harm them but were deadly to native animals like the dire wolf or even giant plant eaters if the disease could jump between species. We've already seen something like this happen in history. After European colonists arrived in the Americas in the 1500s, diseases they carried wiped out huge numbers of indigenous people who had never encountered those microbes before. That historical event gives us a powerful clue about what might have happened to Ice Age animals thousands of years earlier. The idea that new diseases, also called pathogens, might have played a major role in wiping out the giant animals of the Ice Age is both fascinating and difficult to prove. This theory suggests that as early human groups spread across different parts of the world, they unknowingly brought along unfamiliar diseases. These could have come directly from their own bodies or from animals they had tamed, such as dogs. When these diseases reached wild animals that had never been exposed to them before, the results could have been disastrous. Without any natural resistance, entire species could have fallen sick and died very quickly, leading to mass extinction. At the heart of this idea is a concept scientists call immunological naivete. That simply means an animal has no past experience with a disease, so its immune system is completely unprepared. When a new virus, bacteria, or parasite shows up, it can spread like wildfire, causing illness and death on a massive scale. We've seen something similar in human history. When European explorers arrived in the Americas in the 1500s, they brought diseases like smallpox and measles. The indigenous peoples of the Americas had never faced those diseases before, and millions died as a result. The same kind of devastation could have happened to Ice Age animals when humans and their animal companions arrived in new places. The diseases carried by humans and their dogs could have been any kind of microbe. Fast-moving viruses, harmful bacteria, or exhausting parasites. A virus might sweep through a herd quickly, killing many in a short time. Bacteria could cause slow, painful infections, and parasites might weaken animals over time, leaving them too sick or tired to find food or reproduce. Some of these germs might have infected many different animals, while others might have been very specific. Perhaps a virus that only attacked large plant eaters, or a bacterium that spread easily among animals that lived in tight social groups. How these diseases spread also matters. For a disease to cause a mass extinction, it would need to spread easily and be very deadly. It could pass from animal to animal by touch, through shared food or water, or through insects like ticks. If the animals lived in large groups like herds, the disease could race through the population. But even animals that lived far apart wouldn't be safe if they gathered at the same watering holes or if the disease was incredibly contagious. One powerful version of this theory is called the hyperdisease idea. This suggests that a new and especially deadly disease appeared, maybe a virus that had mutated or a brand new germ never seen before, and this disease struck hard and fast. Unlike normal diseases that usually kill only the weak or sick, a hyperdisease could wipe out healthy animals too. This would explain why so many giant animals vanish so quickly. In some places, these extinctions happened in just a few thousand years, a blink of an eye in geological time. That speed fits with what we know about deadly outbreaks that outpace a population's ability to fight back. Proving this theory, however, is very difficult. Unlike bones or stone tools, microbes and soft tissues usually do not survive for tens of thousands of years. Scientists do try to study ancient DNA from preserved animal remains, but it is extremely hard to find and identify specific disease-causing microbes in such old material. Because of this, the evidence for the disease theory is mostly indirect. Scientists look at how quickly the animals disappeared, which kinds of animals vanished, mostly the big ones, and how closely their decline lines up with the arrival of humans and their animals in new regions. It is also important to remember that sick animals are often more vulnerable when they are already under stress. During the end of the Ice Age, the climate was changing dramatically. Habitats were shrinking, food became harder to find, and animals had to travel more or behave differently just to survive. These pressures may have weakened their immune systems, making them easy targets for diseases. On top of that, habitat loss and human activity might have split populations into smaller, more isolated groups. These small groups would have had less genetic variety, which made it harder for them to resist a new disease. This theory also shows how humans could have caused extinctions without even trying. If people or their animals were the ones bringing in new diseases, then even without directly hunting the megafauna or destroying their environments, humans could still have played a major role in their disappearance. For example, when humans crossed into North America from Siberia by way of the Bering Land Bridge, sometime around 15,000 years ago, they may have brought dogs with them. These dogs might have carried diseases that didn't harm them but were deadly to native animals like the direwolf or even giant plant eaters if the disease could jump between species. We've already seen something like this happen in history. After European colonists arrived in the Americas in the 1500s, diseases they carried wiped out huge numbers of indigenous people who had never encountered those microbes before. That historical event gives us a powerful clue about what might have happened to Ice Age animals thousands of years earlier. Although we still don't have solid, direct proof, the disease hypothesis is a strong and thought-provoking idea. It gives us a possible explanation for how so many giant animals could disappear so quickly. It also reminds us that human influence doesn't always come in obvious forms like spears or fire. Sometimes it arrives invisibly, in the form of tiny microbes hitching a ride on people or their pets. Understanding this hidden force from the past remains one of science's great challenges. And to solve it, scientists continue to use a mix of archaeology, biology, genetics, and ecology to uncover the invisible threads that may have helped unravel the great animal kingdoms of the Ice Age.